And we're back. This is the movie discussion pocket dimension where, does anybody remember? Time does not exist. The only thing that matters is film. I'm Cole, and there is Jay, and it's been a long time. Yes, this is we might as well address this. This is the longest hiatus we've ever sort of had, which is too bad. 2023 has not been the year we envisioned for the show at all, and there's no point in getting into the hurdles or excuses and things like that. The thing is, we're back, and for people who are very attentive and have good memories, you're going to say, hey, weren't you guys like doing a series? Weren't you guys doing a series on Werner Herzog? We were, and we have not abandoned that. We're interrupting it because of the desperation of the situation. You know, if we wanted to continue with that series, we would have had to probably do some more preparation, and we were both new, like way too much time to us. We had to get it back out here and get something. So we settled on one of actually the original movies from our original list when we first brainstorming the show. This is Metropolis 2001, the anime, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. But yeah, we're still hoping to complete and return to the Werner Herzog series. But the position we were in, we were like, we'd have to put even more time off if we were going to get that going. So it was most important to finally just get something going and get up and come back. So yes, it's been a long time. A lot of time has passed. And just even recently, like my movie watching had slowed way down. And I was having trouble like committing to things. Like not even like a long movie, like an ordinary hour and a half movie. I'd be like, I don't feel like watching that right now. And it wasn't even just like what it was. Like the most recent movie I watched besides this movie was I watched a new release. I watched, I think it's Jennifer Lawrence, that comedy, No Hard Feelings, which is it's a movie. Like, I don't know. I guess it helped me get back in movie watching. Like, there's nothing really bad about it. There's nothing really good about it. It's just sort of a movie that comes and goes. And in a way, it was just good to get any movie under my belt and be like, okay, I can watch movies again. Because for a long time, I was just sort of avoiding them. I've been playing a lot more games and reading a lot more books, and I mean, I want to keep that up. But just for a while, like even when I had the time, like I have nothing to do, I could watch a movie now, and I'd be like, I don't feel like committing to a movie, and not even a long movie. So, but hopefully, I've gotten out of that headspace and I can commit to movies again. So I guess I can have No Hard Feelings to thank for that. You know, it's funny. No Hard Feelings has one kind of interesting parallel to me. It was pretty different, but there was a movie way back in 2004 called The Girl Next Door. And that had, I think, I can never remember the guy's name because he's dropped off the face of the earth. It's a weird name. And the blonde who's married to Dion Phaneuf, she's also Canadian. She's been on 24.
Yeah. I know who you're talking about.
Anyway, her.
Cuthbert.
And in that, Alicia Cuthbert. In that, it was like supposed to be like sort of like a romantic comedy type thing. And it was like the premise he was like this wide-eyed kid like moves in next door to him. She's a former porn star, but the whole thing is she's trying to like leave that life behind, and he starts dating her, and it's like that'll be funny. Then you watch the movie and it's not funny, and it's not because it's like the jokes are bad, it's because like it's not really a comedy. It's like dark and serious and seems to be like a serious commentary on like the sad state of like people in the porn industry and like what it does to you and how it like empties you out. And that was 2004. It's probably even fucking worse now, almost 20 years later. But like the movie was so marketed as like a goofy comedy. It's like, he doesn't know what he's getting in for. She's a beautiful girl, but she's a former porn star. But like it's so serious and dark and depressing at parts. Anyway, this movie seems like kind of like the same spirit of those previews, but actually put in a lighthearted context. This movie is lighthearted. She's not a porn star. She's just sort of a, I don't know, kind of just like a weirdo. I don't know what you would call her. She's just sort of a 32-year-old who's like in desperate straits. So she answers this ad to like date this kid to bring him out of his shell. And anyway, there's nothing really good about it, but at least it stays lighthearted. I felt like it kind of accomplished what was sort of promised in The Girl Next Door, whereas The Girl Next Door takes a weird turn and gets really serious and just bums you out. But this movie is sort of a lighthearted movie, but there's nothing really to say about it. It's a movie. You get to see Jennifer Lawrence nude in it, and that sounds great. But the lighting, I mean, if you're a committed perv like me, like it's a night scene, so the lighting's not as good as you'd like it to be. I don't know, but she basically comes up fully nude and attacks 3 teens that had stolen her clothes on the beach. So you do get to see that. But I guess that's what it took to get me watching movies again. That masterpiece. It also features the song "Man-Eater" by Hall & Oates. And what's funny is when it's first mentioned, the kid will later perform it. The kid says like how it scared him as a kid, but he's like, And that's the same thing as that. It scared me as a kid. Like, I didn't get the subtext either. I thought he was literally talking about somebody that killed and ate men, and it was a scary song. Oh, here she comes. It was sort of, so I could relate on that level. I could relate to the movie, except the difference was by the time I was 19, the age of that kid, I knew what it was. And the joke in the scene is like he still didn't know. She's like, no, that's not really what the song's about. And then for some reason he performs it spontaneously at a restaurant in front of a bunch of people because she makes him. Anyway, we can leave that behind. It just sort of, but just the last few weeks, my movie watching has been very sparse, and that kind of was the first thing I'd watched in quite a while, like just start to finish. So
Yeah,
whatever it takes, I
I've been
guess.
in the same boat. I've just been watching like a lot of like series and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of movies until recently. I watched a few. I watched The Killer last night, the new
That's
Fincher movie.
the new, yeah. I've heard it's
Yeah,
good.
yeah, it was okay.
Too many movies called The Killer.
That's
Too,
true. It's
too,
based on a graphic novel. Have you read it?
I have not. I hadn't even heard of it.
Yeah,
This one, never
I
heard
hadn't
of,
heard
didn't
of it
know at
either.
all. So it's something I'll have to look into. Speaking of that, and I'm not going to talk, not even even though it deserves more than what I just gave on No Hard Feelings. But not too long ago, I watched The Killer Inside Me with Casey Affleck. Did you
Casey
see that?
Affleck. Mm-hmm.
I can see why that didn't do well. It's a very bleak, uncompromising type of movie.
Yeah, I've seen it a few times, and I don't really care for it.
No, it just makes you feel kind of dirty, really.
Uh,
Watching Casey Affleck like punch Jessica Alba to death,
yeah.
like, is really uncomfortable because it
Mm,
takes so much time.
well,
He
yeah.
puts on a pair of gloves and just kills her only with his fist, doesn't kick her or anything like that. So it takes a while, and it never.
Which you know Casey Affleck couldn't do that. Like he wouldn't be
Probably.
physically strong enough to do that.
I doubt it. But yeah,
You got to get Ben
interesting.
in there. Ben in there's got to take care of business.
But I mean, the movie seemed like something on the surface that appealed to me, but watching it, I don't know. Maybe the novel's better. It's a very dark novel. Speaking of very dark novels, I started reading Blood Meridian, but we won't talk about that right now. Right now. But that movie, that book's been around since 1985, and there's been at least 2 other attempts to make it into a movie that went nowhere, including a Ridley Scott attempt, which would have been interesting. Now, whoever the guy is that did the movie adaptation for also a McCarthy book, The Road, they're saying he's going to do it. It's his name Hillcoat or something weird like that. But I don't know. But I don't know how much they can include because, again, the book is extraordinarily violent and things that you couldn't show because things happen to children and stuff too. But the book itself, the way it's written, is very interesting, and I've been sort of on and off. At first, I was complaining about how it was written. Now I kind of appreciate it. I don't know. It's a difficult read. The way McCarthy decides to form his sentences. Sometimes, like, each sentence is he like creates it like it's a little work of art on its own. And he has his own little styles of things. Like, I can't stand the way he sort of discounts or disregards punctuation in a lot of places. Won't use quotation marks. Stuff like that drives me up the wall. But the book is winning me over about halfway through. Things are starting to get interesting. The main character's now joined the gang of the scalp hunters, which is the main thrust of the book, although it takes a while to get there. So I'm pretty interested in that. But I don't know. I don't think everything needs to be a movie. I think it's fine if they never make it into a movie. Not everything needs to be a movie. I understand that it's a famous story and it's good and it's cool and has cinematic possibilities for sure, but I don't know. If at the end you're just going to wind up with something that's can't really do it justice, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that's what happens all the time. But so anyway.
Yeah.
McCarthy died last year. I mean, he was old. He was a lot older than I thought he was. He was almost 90. I think he was born in 39.
Wow.
But he was never an author I was that interested in, even though he's fairly famous and he'd been around a long time. He had this long period of inactivity, and then he wrote No Country for Old Men, which was hugely acclaimed, and then they did make a movie of that, and that movie was hugely acclaimed. It really got his name back out there. And then he followed it up fairly quickly with The Road, which is another super bleak type movie, but it doesn't bother me the same way. Like, some people are like, I can't watch The Road. I'm like, I don't know. I've seen worse, I guess.
Because of the cannibalism.
I mean, I don't like cannibalism, that's for sure. You've heard me blather on about that. I think that's like I find that way more uncomfortable than a lot of things that people find comfortable in movies. But
It's
even
probably one of the
implied
ultimate taboos, you know.
yeah, even implied cannibalism makes me sick. But yeah, you do something like you play the first The Last of Us. There's that whole section with Ellie and the group that are just like cannibals. It's like, well, that goes a lot harder, really. So I wonder. I assume they eventually got to that on the show. I watched about the first 5 or 6 episodes, and I didn't like the girl, so it was hard. Like she's like the main character, and I didn't like her. I did not think she was well cast at all. And
that's kind of the key.
Yeah,
the key actress.
Yeah, like I'm not saying she's a bad actress. I'm saying she was wrong for the part. But anyway, I don't want to do too many digressions as I've already done. But as I said, it's been a long time. I'm just trying to explain how I've gotten from a point of almost watching nothing into watching stuff. But as far as series goes, I haven't watched any series with one exception, which will tie into what we're doing tonight. Metropolis.
Yeah, so I watched The Killer last night because I have a few movies that are newer movies by directors that I like.
Mm-hmm.
It's just everything is 3+ hours, man, and I don't have.
The Killer's
time
really
for that
long too, huh?
Now, The Killer was that's why I chose it, because it was the shortest of the 3 I wanted to watch. It was Flowers of the Killer Moon, whatever that one is, the Scorsese one. And
well, everything's
one
Scorsese
more.
goes this long.
It was one more from a director that I like that I looked at, and it was just so long. Like it was 3.5 hours or something. And I'm going to watch it. I'm going to get to it, but it's, going to have to take me probably a couple days.
Yeah, that does make it difficult. I don't know. I don't have any interest in Killers of the Flower Moon. Like I said, I often defend movies for being long because I figure, like, if a movie needs to be long, it needs to be long. But Scorsese really pushes it. Like, all Scorsese movies are so long.
Needs to be is a key word. I'm fine with long movies if it doesn't necessarily warrant that sometimes, like there's some of that should have been left on the floor, the cutting room.
Because, I mean, I know he did, like, The Irishman a few years earlier, and that's
I still haven't watched it because of that.
And I was just like, nope. Well, I feel like The Irishman was such a dumb movie for him to do. Like, I'm not going to turn into a Marvel fanboy and be like, I'm going to attack the guy that yelled at my comic book movies. But I will just say, like, one of the things he said, like, he's like, these movies don't take any risks. I'm like, you just did The Irishman. What risk is that? You just did yet another gangster epic about 20th century American gangsters featuring the same stable of actors you've been using since the goddamn 70s. What risks are you taking, Martin? Yeah. So
no, it's the stuff he said there for a few years. Like, was he the one that said that, like, movies that only come out on Netflix aren't real or shouldn't be considered for an Academy Award?
He was part of that group, yeah.
But that, I mean, just because the damn movie came out on 2 screens in LA doesn't mean that was I couldn't watch that movie in the theater. Yeah. It was on Netflix,
Yeah, so how's that considered?
It went straight to Netflix, so you're guilty of exactly what you complain about.
Well, it's funny. It's like just around the time that group was doing that complaining, like they almost sort of immediately realized that like they didn't have any leg to stand on. They're all like, okay, we'll just release straight to Netflix. Because the whole thing that started was it 2018? I think that movie Roma came out. Roma was like a Netflix exclusive movie, and Roma got a lot of awards and stuff. And even Spielberg, who I thought better of, was one of the ones that complained about this whole thing, about how like Roma shouldn't have been eligible for this award or that because it wasn't like a true movie because he didn't have a cinema. Yeah, it's like, fuck off.
But that shows you how, how detached they are from the rest of the world, because that is the future. I mean, I think you'd be stupid to not think that. And they're like, oh, cinema. Yeah, it's great. I love the cinema too, but it's not where it was, even 10 years ago now. So
just like there's different paths to being a filmmaker, and they should be happy about that, Like nowadays, it's a lot easier. And I get it. Maybe for the older generation, you scoff at that because now you could like shoot a movie on iPhone, put it on YouTube, and the next thing you know, people are giving you calls and you can become a real filmmaker, whereas they had to claw up the hard way. But I don't know. I think sometimes that kind of stuff balances out too, because like whenever I read about, especially like authors and people that like wrote for like magazines and comics, as I always wanted to be an author. Like, man, it was so much easier to get published like 50 years ago and more. Like people just like walk into offices and they're like, here's a job. Like nowadays it's like all the red tape you have to go through, like even to get somebody to look at a manuscript is insane. Like, look at Stan Lee. You know why Stan Lee was the editor at Marvel? Because the other editors quit when he was a teenager, and they didn't bother to hire any replacements. So they're like, Stan, you're editor now. Because it was the fucking 40s, and nobody cared. And, and then he went on to build, on his own, with plenty of talented people, build it up into what it was. But, I mean, to get in, all he was just some gopher. He was a teenage gopher in the office, entry-level job. Then Joe Simon and Jack Kirby quit and left. And they didn't know how to replace them. And they're like, Stan, can you write some stuff and be editor? And he's like, I guess so. And that was, that was the beginnings for Stan. And like,
hey, I mean, somebody's got to do it. So yeah,
but that does not happen now, right? Like, you go find like the smallest like independent comic publisher you can, and you're still not going to get hired that way. You're just not. But anyway, so I think sometimes that kind of stuff levels out, because sometimes like older generations talk about some stuff was harder, but I was like, yeah, but some stuff was also a lot fucking easier too. So I don't know. I think it kind of balances out a bit.
Well, I mean, just think about all the people that, may have been good filmmakers, but they didn't have access to equipment and, all the other assets you needed. Now, I mean, yeah, you could do it on your phone, but you could buy a decent, 4K camera for relatively cheap, or, rent one for relatively cheap. So, I mean, oh, well, we didn't get to shoot stuff because we didn't want to waste film. But I mean, that's a positive thing, isn't it? I mean, you can just delete it off the hard drive and it's, it's not a problem. But we had to work harder, so it's more important.
I mean, you should at least, I just feel like you should always be trying to encourage the next generation, not tell them what they're doing wrong. Like, one thing I liked about like Kevin Smith was just like, how we made Clerks was like, we just kept using different credit cards and stuff, and it was all up in the air. And he's just like, that's like the best advice I can give right now. So do that, So at least he's willing to like put that out there.
Do you know how many people are probably still in debt because he said that?
Yeah, I know. It's a very risky thing to do. So you have to understand that part of it too. Yeah, I mean, he was lucky. Clerks went on to like be a big phenomenon and everything. But for every story like that, there's a million where like the movie just languages in obscurity, nobody watches it, and you're bankrupt.
Yeah, I mean, 9 times out of 10, that movie he made would have probably never seen the light of day, if he hadn't talked to the right person at the right time. I mean,
yeah. So just like anything, like I said, whether it's publishing or making, there's a lot of luck and stuff involved too. So I get a little annoyed when some of the elder statesmen act like, they've got more right to it than younger people.
Yeah, I think it's like that with a lot of things, becomes easier and they're not happy about it, but they're not like shooting on film. They're shooting on digital just like everyone else, right?
Yeah.
Practice what you preach.
Every once in a while, a director, because they want to, shoots on film, although I can't remember any recent examples. But
Tarantino did it, didn't he? Didn't he do it with? Didn't he shoot something on? Was it 90 millimeter?
Yeah, it might have been the Hateful Eight. Might have been.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes this is not the show to do it, but sometime we'll maybe do something like some movie, so we can talk about like the various formats of the films too, because that's also very interesting. How in like the 30s and 40s you had that sort of box format, and then it all changed for like the wide cinescope and things. Yeah. It's funny because I for years thought that like directors would have been happy about that, but actually many directors hated it and were mad about it. And did not like having to shoot for the widescreen cinescope at all, because it really changed the way they wanted to frame things and shoot things. Like for years, I just thought, oh, well, this is obviously the better format and the way they want to do it. But a lot of those directors were totally against it. I've seen some videos on YouTube that are quite interesting talking about the transition. Really? Yeah, some interesting stuff there. And it made me think about some things I'd never considered. Like certain directors who were really interested in like depth of field, but they would do a thing like where it would be more of a height thing, like. Even we did a little when we talked about like Hitchcock, because Hitchcock loved to do stairs, right? He loved shots of people looking upstairs, looking downstairs, and it is true in the widescreen format that doesn't work as well, because you don't get the sense of height as well, because it's more of a sense of width. So that's something that gets a little screwed up there. but something I hadn't thought about. But yeah, I've always been really interested and fascinated by the different formats, the cinescope and the box and the various transformations we've gone through now. I'm annoyed that my TV is old enough that like I can't even really change the aspect ratio into anything useful. Like, because like some of those UK Blu-rays I've been buying mostly of like martial arts movies, like a lot of them like tell me like what the preferred aspect ratio is to watch them, and I can't actually do it. Like it doesn't matter, like it's close enough, but I need to get a new TV. My TV's old.
Yeah, I know it'll zoom. I know that was a feature that I've had to use before, which is awful.
It's not ideal at all, no.
But yeah, you got to do what you got to do.
I'm annoyed. Yeah, like I'm annoyed by those sorts of settings, right? Like sports mode or entertainment or movies. Like, just give me the aspect ratio so I can work that way, because I don't know what the fuck this is. I'm like, this just looks like something with a slightly different tint on it. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
That's what it is. Yeah, it's just a slightly different, some sort of
like, oh, now it's a true cinematic experience on my TV.
Cause now I can see the grass.
Yeah,
grass is the right color. Okay.
So anyway, sometime we'll maybe do some movies that like can talk about taking advantage or the change. So everybody thinks of like, of course, Lawrence of Arabia being a big one. That was shot for Cinescope, the big wide screen. Part of that whole revolution.
So that was 60s?
Yeah, it was, I think, 62.
Okay. Yeah, that would be an interesting time period to cover, because I haven't seen a lot of those movies.
Mm-hmm. And again, in reading Blood Meridian, it's made me think of some of those westerns and things too. Of course, it's quite different from the westerns back in the day. It's obviously a very dark deconstructionist version. But anyway, we'll get to that some other time. But so tonight, this is Metropolis from 2001. And it's weird that it's not more well known because of all the famous factors behind it. Because, okay, first of all, Metropolis, this is based on the manga by the most famous manga artist of all time, Osamu Tezuka. So you'd think that would give it some play. And then you also have the fact that it was directed by Rintaro, who is one of the most famous anime directors of all time. And he certainly was kind of at the height of his fame back in 2001. He'd done the two Galaxy Express movies in 79 and 81 and some other stuff. And also he was of the generation that actually in the 60s, he had started working at Osamu Tezuka's animation studio, Mushi Productions. So he'd work with the man himself. Now, Osamu Tezuka died in 1989 at a fairly young age. He was only 60 years old. So wow. He'd been dead for a decade. And I mean, he packed so much into that life. It's astonishing. But anyway, he'd been dead for a decade when this movie was going into production. And here's the movie, the Blu-ray. I'm going to say the words out of print a lot tonight. And one is, this is out of print. This is the DVD. One of the first DVDs I bought way back around 2002 or so. So old that, do you remember a time in the early 2000s when mini discs were like a thing?
Yeah.
Like, I remember, yeah, because like in 2003, one of my favorite artists, David Usher, who had released many solo albums, he released a solo album. And it was like a normal disc, but then it had like a bonus extra disc. It was a mini CD. And this Metropolis, the extras disc, is a mini thing. And
do you have a player?
And that's what I mean. Modern players can't play this shit. Don't put this in a modern player. You won't get it out. So I can't play it. It was fine back in the day when my player was a PlayStation 2, but we've come on. So, you can't put mini disc. So I haven't been able to watch this, which is annoying because one of the things was, all I can remember is there's one part where they're talking to Rintaro, a couple of the producers, and they said something like, if Osamu Tezuka had lived, what do you think he'd think of the movie? And I remember that Rintaro laughed and said, I think he probably wouldn't like it. And what sucks is I don't remember what he said after that, like why he wouldn't like it. Like, why wouldn't he like it? I don't know. I mean, one thing is that, so speaking of out of print, so Metropolis is, I don't know how well it's known as a manga. Probably not that well known. It was one of his first big successes, but again, when you think about how old he is, that was 1949, right? And speaking of Osamu Tezuka's works as translated into English, well, Dark Horse started doing that in the early 2000s. Guess what? Pretty much all those are out of print. So I never ever got my hands on Metropolis. I do have my hands on some other things. Here is I have several volumes of Osamu Tezuka's great unfinished work, Phoenix, which is this massive epic spanning eras to very I don't know how to sum it up quickly, but I'll just say the whole idea was it jumped back and forth in time. Like earliest, it starts way back in the past, and the other one is like a far, far future. And the idea is, as he released each volume, they got closer and closer to a middle, to what would probably be like the present. But he died, and we didn't get there. But there's quite a few volumes. This is Sun Part 1. So this is Volume 10. I actually have Part 2 of that, which is pretty lucky. But one of the other ones I do happen to have is Volume 2, called Future, which is the first one that I mentioned. So the first one is like far past. The second one is first. This is the furthest of the future of what we see. And there's a reason why I have this here. I'll tie into what we're doing here in a second. But anyway, all out of print, very hard to find. I got a couple of these in New York and other places. And now if you want to buy them, you have to like pay crazy prices on Amazon or maybe hunt them down somewhere else. So hard to find. So that's another reason why I think maybe this movie gets a bit forgotten, because I think a lot of Westerners don't know the manga, and it's not their fault even. I think you could probably read it online, and maybe I will at some point. But the other thing is, of course, the movie is an adaptation of the manga, but it doesn't stay too faithful to it. And the manga itself, people might say, oh, is it some sort of adaptation or spin of the famous silent movie, the 1927 German film? It is and it isn't. Basically, by 1949, when he was starting this, I think he used the name, but in 1949, Osamu Tezuka was a guy who did see a lot of movies compared to the average Japanese citizen growing up when he did, but he never saw that back then. And it makes sense. Like, would a Japanese language version of that movie even exist in the 40s? At the time, all he'd seen was a still photo image, a still from the movie, I think showing the female robot in it in a magazine. That's all he knew. That's what he knew. He knew Metropolis, and he knew that image. So that's all he had to go on. And so he made up a completely original story, although it does still have some strong parallels to that movie. So tying the three together, this movie, the silent movie, and the manga is like, it's obviously about a super advanced city called Metropolis, and there's definitely some versions of robots running around. And also the idea is like the wealthier people live on like the highest levels, and then there are lower levels below it, including like a very oppressed working class. That all works into all three versions. But besides that, the plots diverge quite a bit. And so most of the main characters in this are from the manga, but they're not exactly like they are in the manga. Like there's the Japanese detective, there's Duke Red, but they're not all exactly the same. And actually, one of the big differences, the robot girl in this is Tima, who is fashioned after the daughter of Duke Red. And that in the manga, it's completely different. It's actually a boy named Michi, and there's no sort of tie to Duke Red's personal life in it. In fact, it wasn't even his idea in the manga to make it. Or in this, Tima was made by Lawton at Duke Red's request. Also, speaking of holding these things up, so here, getting back to Future, a completely unrelated thing, is the fact that one of the main characters in the movie here is not in the novel, is not in the original manga at all, and that's Rock. Rock is not in the comic, even though he plays a huge role in the movie. But there is a Rock that looks exactly like this and acts exactly like this in Future. There he is. You can see his sunglasses and his hair.
So they took characters from that one as well and just kind of incorporated it into Metropolis.
Well, at least just Rock. The other characters are, like I said, like Duke Red, the detective, Lawton. They are all in the original manga, and they're similar at least. Like, although they have some different personality quirks and different motivations. But Rock is obviously pulled from this, in that he looks just like this. And he is an antagonist in this too. And so very quickly, in this, you've got like a far, 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 far future society. And then in this society, there's these weird alien things called like moopies. And what moopies can do is they can turn into any shape you want. And there's this main character, and he's in a romantic relationship with one, which people are not supposed to be do. And she's usually in the form of like a pretty girl. And anyway, they wind up finding out about like this this upcoming apocalypse is going to like wipe everybody out, and they escape, and Rock chases them, and then there's more stuff going on in there. But anyway, and throughout this, Rock shows a lot of like contempt for the movie because she's not human, and that seems to be reflected in the Rock character in the movie here, because Rock's prime motivation in this is he hates robots and does not trust them, and the rest is all about protecting his father, blah blah blah. So I thought that was interesting because even in stuff I've read about this does not mention where Rock came from. They just say like, oh well, Rock's actually not from the manga, but Rock is very clearly pulled from Future. So that's interesting. And I'll just say another thing is something that Osamu Tezuka did himself in his works was he sort of created a stable of actors, and that he would have archetype characters and he would use them again and again in different roles in his manga. So some of the earliest ones, showing up in Metropolis again. He'd done stuff even earlier than that, but 1949. This is pre-Adam, right? Astro Boy. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. But anyway.
Wow. I wasn't expecting all that. Yeah, I knew when I was reading about it, it said loosely based. So
yeah, loosely. It's loosely based.
Loosely based, and then the Metropolis is just like the visual, like the original, the silent film. You get some of the visuals
early in this.
The way the building looks, the whatever that huge building is,
the ziggurat. Yeah. And you see that big statue. That statue seems like it's pulled from the original movie too, which is pretty cool. But yeah, there's a weird intermingling. Like I said, it's based on the manga with some quirks, which takes some inspiration from the silent film, but none of it's completely faithful. It's all just sort of an intermingling, I guess, of things. But as I said, I'm always at a loss, like why this movie isn't more well known, because it's based on the works of the most famous manga artist of all time. It's directed by one of the most famous anime directors. Oh yeah, and the studio behind it is only Madhouse. Madhouse are, to pardon the almost pun, but Madhouse are one of the big powerhouse animation studios in Japan. They've made some of the biggest and most famous stuff, including stuff that's well known in the West, including stuff that's like directly based on Western properties. For instance, they've done animes based on Marvel. They did the animation for Todd McFarlane's Spawn. They did a Highlander one that I've never even heard of. They did Batman Gotham Knight. They contributed to the Animatrix. So that's just stuff that's based on Western properties. So even people in the West would know Madhouse. But on the Japanese side, of course, they did Death Note. They did the earlier works of Clamp, which would be a lot of some of those magical girl animes from the 90s, although famously not Sailor Moon, but a lot of the other ones. Satoshi Kon, who we'll talk about someday, who was one of my favorite directors, and he was the guy who did Paprika and Perfect Blue. That was his studio. All his movies are Madhouse. So again, and this movie must have had an extremely high budget. You can see that way back in like 2000, 2001 or so. I remember, I think Ryan and I rented something, just some random movie. It wasn't animated, it was just some movie. And it had a preview for Metropolis. And like my jaw dropped when I saw it. Think of how old, like this movie's over 20 years old, and look how fucking good it was. Yeah. So in 2001, everything was cutting edge. 2001, just around the time Disney is thinking they're going to start like abandoning 2D animation. And, over in Japan, it's just like we're doubling down. And Metropolis seems to be the culmination of that. Like it must have had a massive budget. So it was a huge, huge project. And yet in the years since, like it does not seem to get talked about or mentioned much. I never read anywhere that it was specifically a flop in Japan. And I don't know. I'm just going to say I love the movie. It's one of the reasons why I like 2001 so much for movies. I adore the movie. I haven't seen it in a few years, and it still holds up. It's just as good as I remember it to be. So
that's interesting. I know 2001 is one of your favorite years for film. Right?
It is my favorite year. Yeah, because 2001 had this, and also speaking of anime, it had the Studio Ghibli film Spirited Away. And then you had things like on the big budget side, you had the first Lord of the Rings movie, Fellowship of the Ring, which is my favorite of the trilogy. Smaller things like Amelie and Donnie Darko. Those are all, which we've also covered on this show. They're also 2001. So, yeah, there's different ways for, quantifying what your favorite year in film is, right? You can go like quality or quantity. Mine is like quality. It's like that top 20, nothing comes close to it. Like there might be a year that produced more movies in general I like, but 2001 is very top heavy for me. I think my second favorite year might be 86. But
it's a good year.
But again,
a lot of good
this movie's
80s.
anyway. This movie's a big part of it. This is a big reason why. Love this movie.
Oh, very cool. I'd like to do more animes. I think we did the series
Fully Cooley.
Yeah. But
And
maybe all we've done. Oh, we did Akira, didn't we? Like way back when.
We did a couple others. We did Akira, which I know is a little on the nose and kind of expected,
Yeah.
but we both love the movie, so we did it. But also a kind of parallel to this movie, although not very much. But we did do Tekken Concrete, which is also based on like a fictional, highly stylized city, although that city is much more real world, whereas this is a clear sci-fi city of the future. But we did do Tekken Concrete. And we did do one Studio Ghibli movie. We tried to pick a less famous one. We did way back in the day, way back in our first season, if you want to call it. We did Porco Rosso. But yeah, I would definitely like to do maybe a movie by Satoshi Kon. And then there's another director whose name I always forget, who's done some movies, who's one of the current big directors. Wait, I just want to get his name, so I get it up there, right?
Good. This Madhouse. Who else? The two films you mentioned with Madhouse. Those are both good ones. Perfect Blue and
yeah. So that's Satoshi Kon. He's the director of the Perfect Blue and Paprika. But the director I was thinking of that we might even, I don't know, hell, we could go crazy and do a series is Mamoru Hosoda, who's since the mid 90s been around.
Well, we're making the rules, so let's do it.
Yeah, so he's done a whole bunch of really interesting movies, and he's one of the more celebrated current directors of the time. You know, he'd be younger. He's in his mid 50s now. He'd be a Gen X guy, but he did The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, Wolf Children, The Boy and the Beast, Belle, which came out back in 2021. So I assume he has more stuff on the go, but those are all really cool, and he has a very distinct visual style. Artistic style that makes him, distinct. You can tell his work from other animes.
I'm not familiar with any of those, so those definitely sound cool.
Yeah, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time is the whole thing because it's actually remember I mentioned Paprika that Satoshi Kon did. Those were both novels written by the same guy. Paprika was a 1991 novel, but if you go all the way back to the late 60s, the same author, whose name I can't remember, also wrote The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. And before the anime version of it came out, which would have been 2006, there was a 1984 live adaptation of it, which I would really love to see, but I have no idea how to get a hold of. Because that's just a very famous. So that's a very famous story period. First, it was a famous novel, then a famous live action movie, now a famous anime movie. But yeah, Mamoru Hosoda. Yeah, he must have. I mean, his last work was Belle, which came out in the summer of 2021. So he must have more stuff going on. So yeah, he was with Madhouse for a couple years. The Girl Who Leapt Through Time and Summer Wars were both Madhouse productions. Then he left, and I believe started and joined Toho or Studio Chizu. Did he? Oh yeah, Studio Chizu. Did he found it? Yeah, he was a co-founder. So he did 2 films with Madhouse, left and co-founded his own studio. But anyway, yeah. So we'll look into that. Jay and I will talk about that later, and maybe there's a possibility of doing a series on him because he is really great. He's one of the current guys right now, for sure.
Yeah, real quick. What's up, Griffin? I'm pretty sure Cole hasn't played this game either, so I'm not familiar. I'm not a big COD guy, so
I don't play it at all. Unfortunately, the wrong person. You'll have to talk to Orc or somebody about it.
Yeah, Orc definitely knows about it.
Yeah. What's funny is actually like a couple of weeks ago, our friend Pizzel, I guess he bought it, and he put on Twitter that he had like a free digital code for it. I almost thought of taking him up on it because I was just like, wow, maybe I could just play it that way. See what? And I was like, let somebody who actually wants it get it. I've got too many games on the go right now anyway, which we can maybe talk about a little later once we get through our movie stuff here.
I don't know, man. I don't need the stress of having 12-year-olds kill me over and over again. It's just it irritates me,
Yeah,
and I'm
I
not
never
good
gotten
at
into
those
that.
games. So it's
No,
just I don't need it. You know.
I'm not a multiplayer online person at all. I like to be left alone. I like single player campaigns where I can just work
Yeah.
my way through a story. Now I realize with games like Halo, they actually have a pretty good story that I just never got into. But because I was thinking, oh, what was it? Oh yeah, a couple weeks ago I watched a pretty prominent video game channel called Triple Jump. They often do like big lists of games. They did a list of 101 top like gaming moments, and I'd actually experienced quite a few of them. But one of the reasons why I was still under half was because a lot of them were from some really big popular franchises that I just, for whatever reason, never played. I'm not saying they're bad. I just never been interested. And Halo was there, So you got like Halo, Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, God of War. These are massive games with millions of players. I just never played them. Not saying they're not good. It just I've only got so much time, and I'm kind of digging into the games I'm digging into. I mean, I always try to make time for new stuff. The best thing about games and movies and things is trying something new and not always just doing the same stuff over and over again. But yes, I've heard about the RoboCop thing. It's caused a bit of a stir.
That sounds cool. I didn't know there was one.
I know it seems like such an out of nowhere concept.
What type of game is it?
That's a good question.
It's like a.
I don't think it's open. I don't think it's open world.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
But maybe it is. I don't know. I'll have to look into it. But yeah, I've heard some good things too, but again, sort of vague, so I don't really know exactly how it goes.
I need something new to play. I'm so tired of everything. So yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah. I'm going to play Spider-Man 2, but not yet.
Yeah, I want to get that. I like the first one.
I mean, the first one's really good, so I know the only problems I have with the first one are going to carry over into the second one, but these are very minimal problems. They're not going to stop me from enjoying the game. I realize it's an excellent game. It's one of the better Spider-Man stories out there. It's done very well. So I've got pretty good faith in the second one continuing that. What was the other? I'll talk about it later. About games, but
yeah, I tried to get into the Texas Chainsaw and just wasn't very good.
Yeah, I watched some gameplay of it. I don't know. It doesn't seem like something I'd be interested in, but
yeah,
I'm glad people like it. Because I mean, it would seem like the same sort of concept as like Friday the 13th, where you're trying to like the Friday the 13th game, where you're like trying to work together to try to escape an area and not get killed. I feel like that would get old fast.
Like to actually beat the game, it's more to it.
Yeah, I bet.
To win to beat the killers, to beat the whatever Sawyer family, whatever last name they went with.
Yeah,
Sawyer or whatever.
I'm sure the Call of Duties are fine. I don't know. I was never a first-person shooter guy. Like a couple exceptions, like GoldenEye was kind of an exception. But and it's funny because I feel like Call of Duty probably built on this a bit. But back in the day, there was a series called Medal of Honor, game set during World War II that I liked too. And I feel like Call of Duty probably borrows quite a bit from those. And I did like those, but I don't know. I just remember in like the time that like stuff like Quake was really big. Like I didn't like Quake. I didn't care. Or Half-Life. And I'll say something about Half-Life though, is like that is one of the better stories. If you're actually story oriented, like that's one of the better stories you can follow in like a first person shooter type game. Probably the best I can, and this is again my exception, the best stories and best worlds for me that I like so much were the BioShock games. BioShock are great.
Oh,
play the hell out of them.
I love everything about it.
Wonderful atmosphere, wonderful story, great stuff. I always play them every couple of years, never get tired of them. I don't know why there hasn't been a new one in so long, but anyway.
Let me show you this real quick. You mentioned GoldenEye. This is a GoldenEye costume, like cosplay type thing.
That's an actual like thing he puts on his head.
Yeah.
Oh, that is awesome.
And he's got something under his shirt to make his shirt like all whatever you call
blocky and
yeah,
like polygons. That's funny. I was thinking of GoldenEye just too because last night I had a hockey game on. I wasn't paying full attention to it. There was a part where after a goal happened, there was kind of a long review because I think they were seeing if it was offside. No, I don't know. They were reviewing it for some reason. And usually, what the rinks do during that is the joke used to be they might play like the Jeopardy music, right? The Jeopardy music for the final question. But you run out of time. But actually, this rink, I think it was Calgary. It was maybe Calgary, Nashville. But anyway, they were playing the GoldenEye music from the game, which is like the menu where it's the main thing, the da 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 da. But it's that really minimalized one. It's like do 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 do. They were playing that, which I thought was pretty funny. I was like, oh, the memories. It's the mission screen. That's what it is. It's the music you get on the mission screen when you're reading the various missions. Anyway, let's get into the movie. So, I am just a big fan, even if you put anime aside. I like a lot of stories about robot shit. I like those stories that talk about, it's funny because now everybody's talking about artificial intelligence now, of course. But, we've done this before. We did AI, of course. The idea of like how human could a robot be and things like that. And it's always been something I've been interested in.
Sure.
And some of my favorite stories are about that, like Blade Runner, for instance. I really like the replicant stuff in Blade Runner. So this movie comes out well after Blade Runner, but it's based on source material that predates Blade Runner. But as far as the original manga goes, except for Michi, the character that is Tima in this, like, there's not too much stuff I think about robots and robot rights. I think more of that comes from the Mighty Atom or Astro Boy world that would be later created by Osamu Tezuka, because that's a big part of it. So, okay, now we're getting into another iceberg, which is one of the main reasons why this movie, which I've been a fan of for all these years and wanted to do for so long, popped back into my head, is because one of the best mangas I've ever read was just finally adapted into a series, and it was released on Netflix just now, and it's called Pluto. And I'll explain it, but first I'll just say, even before I explain it, watch Pluto, because it's like one of the best fucking things ever. So, the long story of Pluto, and here's one of the volumes in English, and that's Adam on the front. So that's Adam or Astro Boy. So you think, oh, it's an Astro Boy thing. Well, not exactly. So I'll just say, okay. So Osamu Tezuka's, of course, most famous manga is Mighty Atom, which he started in 1952 and wrote all the way well over 20 years into the 70s. And he was part of two different animation shows based on it. The original one from the 60s, and then one in the early 1980s, which I grew up watching a Canadian version of. That's right, there was a specifically Canadian version of it. But anyway, going back to the comic, again, he wrote many, many volumes of this comic. And there was a story in 1964 called The Greatest Robot on Earth, which was a story about how this mysterious robot, but eventually identified as somebody named Pluto, was going around challenging the most powerful robots on Earth and destroying them. And of course, Atom was one of those robots, so he's eventually going to target him. So then in the early 2000s, Naoki Urasawa, celebrated manga artist, I don't know if he came up with the idea on his own, but anyway, the idea was he wanted to do a reimagining of that specific story. And that's what Pluto is. And well, of course, there's Adam, and Adam's in it, and he's important. He shifts the focus away from Adam, and so you have like these 7. So Adam is one of 7 robots that are considered the most powerful and advanced in the world, and this is a world filled with robots, much like the movie we're watching now. But the idea here is like humans and robots live side by side, but there's different levels of robots. Some, like you see in this movie, are just worker drones that don't really seem to have any personality, and then some others seem almost indistinguishable from humans. Anyway, so this starts with one of those 7 robots being annihilated, one called Mont Blanc. It's killed up in the Alps. And the idea, anyway, in the original story was one of the robots was a German robot who worked for a fictitious law enforcement agency, which I think in the adaptation, they called Europol, which is kind of like Interpol. He was a detective, and his name was Gerhardt. For some reason, in Pluto, they changed his name to Gesicht, which is not actually a name. It just means face in German. But anyway, they make him the main character, I guess, because of the fact that he's an investigator. So he becomes the main character. So he becomes involved. He's investigating the deaths of these robots. Plus, there's also humans getting killed too. And there are these humans, and they have this link to the past that I won't get into right now. And the idea, and here's the other thing, going all the way back to the original Atom stories, which you can probably take from the best robot stuff of all time, Isaac Asimov. Even anybody that doesn't read those books knows so much robot fiction is based on the Foundation. Foundation, that's a funny little pun to put in because he did Foundation. But anyway, that Asimov built, starting with the 3 laws of robotics, right? Okay, 3 laws of robotics. Even people who aren't big sci-fi nerds know these. 1, robots through action or inaction cannot allow a human being to come to harm. And then there's 2 and 3, and they can't, and they have their own thing, and they cannot. The only way they can be overridden is if they come into conflict with the first one, right? So there's a version of that going on in the Atom world and Lore of Pluto. So they're thinking, okay, clearly a powerful robot is killing these other robots because they're powerful, but these human deaths, a robot can't kill a human. That's like that's not possible. So who's doing that? But anyway, they just released it on Netflix a couple of weeks ago. It's as straight an adaptation as you'll ever see. Every single page of this is on there. They don't change anything. They don't eliminate characters or subplots. They don't combine one character and another to simplify. They don't cut anything out. They don't change the order of events. Everything as it happens in these pages is up there on the screen in the exact art style. I'm not saying you can do that with everything, but there's proof that you can do it. Anyway, everybody should watch Pluto. It's fucking amazing.
That's cool. I've read the first few books.
Yeah. Speaking of New York, when I was in New York 10 years ago, I caught a couple of the volumes in the original Japanese. So you can see they're a little small. Nice. They're a little smaller. They're not quite as cool. But there, by the way, that's Gesek. That's Gesek on the front there. And there is Atom's sister, Uran, who plays a kind of important role too. But anyway, everybody should watch that. I don't care if you don't like manga or you're not interested. You should definitely watch Pluto. I'm sure you'll be amazed because it's... And I don't object to watching with English either. I think it's one of the ones you should watch with English because of its international. I know I overthink stuff like this, but one of the reasons why I often prefer to watch a lot of animes in Japanese is because usually they're taking place in Japan and the characters would be speaking Japanese.
Right.
But in something like Pluto, it's global. It's about robots all over the world and people all over the world moves around. So not only some of these people would be speaking Japanese. So to me, the English is fine. The voices are quite good. I will say, as much as I love Keith David, he's an amazing guy, right? He has a super iconic voice. He's kind of overused to this point. Like, he plays Dr. Tenma, who is the creator, of course, of Atom, who features in this. And he does well, because Tenma, for those who don't know, he's a very complex character. He's a brilliant, brilliant man, but he's very troubled. And that's really played up in this being, a lot more dark and sophisticated than the original to see if it works. Not that he couldn't do dark and sophisticated, but he didn't really do that with Atom. But anyway, I will say it's still a little distracting to have Keith David doing that voice. I'd rather it was someone else. But apart from that, that's my only time. And again, it's not like he doesn't do a good job. Does a great job. But so yeah, I'd say totally watching that. And anyway, speaking of this movie, did you see this in English or Japanese?
I changed it to Japanese.
Okay.
Just because I usually do that when I have the option.
Yeah, I've seen it in both. I most recently did watch it in English, but I still remember the Japanese. What's nice is there are really no high-profile English voice actors or people to really distract you. But I don't remember the name, but if you had seen it in English, you might remember Atlas, the character Atlas. He's the revolutionary guy, the guy that wants to lead the revolution. In the English dub, he's voiced by the guy that did Aladdin, so with the same voice. So it's just like, I remember the first time I watched it all those years ago, I couldn't pinpoint it first. I was like, I know that voice. It wasn't until like a few years later it hit me. I was like, Aladdin, that's Aladdin.
What?
So Atlas.
Oh, so actually the character Aladdin in the movie. Okay.
Well, no, I mean Atlas is voiced by the guy that did Aladdin in the Disney Aladdin movie. So,
right. But I was trying to think who he was in Aladdin, but he was the main guy.
Oh yeah, Aladdin himself. Yeah, so Aladdin himself is Atlas, which is kind of cool.
And Steve, I have not seen that movie. I remember hearing some mixed stuff when it came out, but
isn't that your pal Gerard Butler?
Is it? Okay, I was thinking Hugh Jackman for some reason, but
maybe it is. It might be Hugh Jackman.
One of those Aussies.
Yeah, I thought maybe it was Gerard Butler. I saw like a couple scenes from it.
Wait, what is Gerard Butler? He's so fucking ambiguous.
I think he's Scottish. Scottish.
Scottish, okay. See, he does everything. He does the same accent in every movie, the same as Russell Crowe.
I mean, nobody bothered poor what's his name about it? Sean Connery. Sean Connery was
I'm a German sub-captain.
I know. I'm from Lithuania.
Yeah.
The ultimate example, I know I've harped on this before for fans of the show, but the ultimate example, of course, being Highlander, a movie about a super Scottish guy. But the super Scottish guy is not playing the Scottish guy. He's playing a guy from Spain. That's one of the most surreal scenes you'll ever see in any movie. Is Christopher Lambert, the Belgian, playing a Scottish Highlander, sitting in a boat having a conversation with a man called the Spaniard, who is played by Sean Connery, in no way changing his accent. And Sean Connery even talks to him about like how he thinks that the concept of like haggis is disgusting or something. That'll just blow your mind.
Oh man, that's funny. Nope, not changing it. This is what you get.
But yeah, Gerard Butler is no Sean Connery, so I guess that's why he can't get away with it. But he did give us the moment, this is Sparta. So come on. He has that at least to his.
He was good in that movie. I will give Gerard Butler. He had quite the physique on him back then as well.
It's a great role for him because he just spends the whole time growling and screaming.
Yeah.
He just growls every line and screams every line. And it just works. It's like, yep, that's Gerard Butler for you.
Well,
but
that would be an episode without me shitting on Gerard Butler in some way.
But now I need to check who was actually in that. You might even be right. Maybe I just went to that.
I don't know.
Well, that's 2011. I thought it was more recent than that.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's been that long.
Yeah, you're right. It's Hugh Jackman. So apparently I brought up Gerard Butler for no reason. Because it is Hugh Jackman. I've seen scenes of it. I don't know. I think that's one of my problems is I like robot stuff, and I haven't seen any robot movies. I'm like, no, I can't judge that one because I've only seen scenes of it. But I mean, like, I hated Chappie. But I mean, I don't like that director. I don't like what he does. So.
Really? Yeah, I didn't like Chappie either, unfortunately. I bought it before I'd seen it. But
like, everybody loved District 9, and I found District 9 so plodding and boring. But at the time, people loved District 9. That's the same director, right?
I like District 9. I wanted it to be something more than it was, and it just didn't ever. And I feel that way with most of his movies that I've seen Elysium and some of the other stuff. And I feel the same way. It's like it's there. I love the world. It's just the movie's not what I want it to be.
Mm-hmm. But man, I can't believe Real Steel's 2011. I thought it was more recent than that. Holy shit!
We have to give that a watch. I'm sure it's fun, at the least.
Right. So Metropolis is about sort of the balance between the classes of people and also the robots forming their own sort of underclass. And you get to, and I realize there's nothing too unique or anything about it. Makes for rather broad commentaries on things like discrimination and stuff. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like all of it's still kind of relevant. Just like I always feel like when you see like X-Men stuff, and in the X-Men they talk about the prejudice of people, because it's the easiest thing in the world to believe, right? Like, look at the world we live in right now and how much hate and prejudice there is just among people. Like, can you imagine that ratcheted up if we had robots running around?
Yeah, I don't know how far away we are from that.
And one of the things that's in Pluto, in this and there, is that there's literally like an anti-robot group that are more or less a Ku Klux Klan against robots. They wear hoods and everything, and they're running around screaming death to robots. So that's, you don't have, and in this, you have the Marduks. That's what they do. It's interesting because when you think about the Marduk party are behind, they're connected to the Duke. And as the robot detective named Perro later says, he says, there's no official ties, but clearly he's the one backing them. He gives them their funding and all that. And he says that whole thing, basically it's a public secret. Like, everybody knows it. Because it's interesting. So there is the most anti-robot group around in the city. And yet their de facto leader is the guy that decides to have a special super robot made so he can use it to take over the world. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of weird when you think about it. I also love how the Marduks are so crazy in their anti-robot violence that like they'll just literally open fire in like crowded public spaces to blow up the robots. Like, there's all these scenes of them mowing down robots and people like diving for cover or hiding. You see like children and they're just like blasting away. It's like they do not give a fuck. They just want to shoot robots.
Yeah, robots, Nazis, communists,
Right. So
fill in
they're
the
compared.
blank.
So they're literally compared. So the Mardics are literally compared to fascists in the movie, which
Mhm.
also tells us something else about the world. So while Metropolis is, a sci-fi movie and it's a fictional city, it's somewhat based on the real world with real history. Our main characters come from Japan. They're visited. We don't know. We're never told geographically where the fuck Metropolis is. We don't know where it is. We don't know how big it is. We don't know even know if it's considered its own nation. They seem to treat it that way. It's a city, but they seem to treat it like a nation. But we know that there's a Japan. The detective mentions fascists, so that seems to suggest, real world history there. And also, wait, there was one other thing too. Oh, that whole thing about the ziggurat and stuff. And they talk about the story from the Bible about the Tower of Babel, right? So it does have some stuff incorporated from the real world into it, which is, I don't know, kind of interesting. The city itself, when Tezuka uh, designed it back for the manga, was basically a mixture of pre-war New York and Chicago with futuristic elements thrown into it. And that's why I think they chose to give it such a retro feel for the movie, right? Because it's a futuristic city, but it was written in 1949, and you get to see some of those weird anachronisms. Like early in the movie, when the detective and his nephew Kenichi visit the superintendent's office to see, who can help them out with their investigation, tracking Lawton, he's sitting at a desk full of papers, stamping them, which seems like a really weird thing to do in this hyper futuristic city full of scientific and technological wonders. But that's what he's doing. He's got paper forms and he's stamping them with a rubber stamp. So there's things like that are always interesting. And you always get that with some futuristic stuff from like earlier 20th century. Speaking of
Mhm.
Asimov, for instance, you read an Asimov book like you read Foundation. Foundation is set like 12,000 years in the future, and yet in some ways, they're still using paper for things,
Right.
and they still haven't actually figured out the idea of like touch screens or even cell phones.
Yeah.
But that's just the nature of how it works.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of cool though. I like the aesthetic.
Yeah,
I
it's a
like.
really great aesthetic, and it ties into the soundtrack too, right? That jazzy ragtime
Yeah.
soundtrack that I like so much. Here's another thing about Rintaro. So if you watch the credits, the whole obviously Rintaro's the director, but Rintaro also played bass clarinet on the soundtrack.
Wow.
In fact, specifically, you can hear him solo because early in the movie, when there's the scene of Duke Red and his two bodyguards descending into the Undercity to visit Lawton's lab, the main theme is then played on bass clarinet. Do 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 do. And so that's clearly Rintaro, which is kind of cool. I like how hands-on he is in the production. And especially
Is
that's probably my favorite part is the second level. So you have upper level futuristic city Wonderland, second level like slums, and then you have the various zones, the industrial zones where the robots work, down to the third zone 3, which is waste management, where humans aren't there at all. But I like the first zone where the humans live. I really love the art. I love the style. I love it when they show those claustrophobic like alleyways and places going deeper on the way to Lawton's lab. I love that little bar that the detective drinks at a couple of times. It looks so great. I can't
mhm.
believe how beautiful it looks all these years later. I mean, it's hard to think of animation surpassing that, and that's over 20 years, over 20
Well,
years ago.
that's one of the good things about real animation is it's almost timeless. I mean, you could have told me that was from the 80s and I would have believed you. You could have told me it was from,
Mm,
last year and,
yeah. I mean, it has some 3D effects that wouldn't have existed in the 80s, but you're right. I mean, as far as the
yeah,
aesthetic and
yeah.
stuff goes. As I said, in 2001, this was as cutting edge as animation got at the time. This movie must have had a massive budget, and they threw everything into it. And I can remember, like, I can't exactly, I guess you could probably find on YouTube maybe the original preview, English preview for it. But I just remember being like, thinking, I just have got to see this movie. Like, it was just a random preview on some movie that we rented, and my, like, jaw just dropped looking at how, like, extraordinary it looked.
Man, I'd love to know what movie that was because it would have had to have been affiliated with those studios, right?
Yeah, like, it wasn't an animated movie. It was just some,
Yeah.
movie. So it's hard when you remember
Oh,
these things.
I'll be darned.
But,
I didn't know there was one.
yeah, there is a Blu-ray again. I think out of print, unless this is a newer one. Because the one I was talking about was one of those Blu-ray DVD combos. So maybe this one that Steven mentions is newer, in which case I'll have to buy it. Like I said, I love my DVD, but I can't watch the special features unless I can get my PS2 working again. But it doesn't seem to work.
So the PS2 plays mini discs?
Yeah, because it has that kind of disc tray, right? Where you can just like pop it on like that.
Oh,
right?
It has the small. Okay, I got.
That's what you need. You need it so that it pops into place. But nowadays, disc trays, you just feed the disc in, right?
Yeah.
And if you feed a mini disc in, it's going to get stuck.
It's just going to get eaten and probably ruin your player too.
Yeah. The last thing, and I mean, I've gotten them stuck before in other things like years ago, but like I think the last like mainstream thing that played mini discs is the Wii. Because the Wii, although you're thinking, wait a second, the Wii games aren't mini discs. They're not. But the Wii is backwards compatible with the GameCube in all its games are mini discs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that I did use. I didn't use actual mini disc. I did use the
so you can feed. So I mean, I've said this. I very briefly, way back in the day, owned a GameCube and lost it in my famous burglary. But I've owned a Wii for years, so I play GameCube games on it all the time. So I think it's the most modern console or device out there that will you can actually feed a mini disc into and it won't get jammed up. But yeah, I remember that was just sort of in the early 2000s, kind of just like a weird fad thing. Like there's no reason for this to be a mini disc. It just is because I guess they thought it was cool. There was no reason for David Usher's bonus disc on his album to be a mini disc. It was just something cool, And that bothered me too because that had like a special track that I couldn't put on my computer.
It wouldn't let you.
Well, again, I couldn't like load it into the drive.
Oh, gotcha.
To rip it, right? Now I've got a computer that doesn't even have a disk drive.
I know. This one doesn't have one.
I might buy an external drive at some point. They're not super expensive.
Yeah, I have an external drive just because, I mean, you need it sometimes. I mean.
Yeah. On that note, it's funny. I'm one of the last people in the world that still makes mix CDs because, like, and I'm actually going to make some soon because every couple of years I'll make a couple so I can play them on the CD player in my parents' car because my parents' car doesn't have any I can't. It won't play Bluetooth off the phone or anything, which drives me nuts. So I'm actually before I go there for Christmas, I'm going to make a couple of CDs, which is really hard because again I have to use my old computer, which is slow as hell because it's over 10 years old, but I kept it to do all the ripping. And what's even worse is anything I bought on iTunes, I had to first transfer this computer to that computer, which through AirDrop. So it's a really time consuming process just so I can make a couple damn CDs to play in the car. But yeah, I've gotten sick of the ones that are there. I've got about 3 in there, but I played them over and over again. I'm tired of them. It's time for some new shit. So I still make mix CDs every once in a while. Of course, Jay and I are both old enough to have made mixtapes back in the day.
Mixtapes?
Yeah. And we're not going to go on about it, but it is true. There's a real art to those. And they take patience.
Yeah. Sorry, I was looking at Blu-rays of Metropolis.
Yeah, nice. I'll have to get it if it's available somewhere. Yeah, that's a different looking one. Yeah, oh yeah, that's the one. Blu-ray DVD Steelbook, yeah.
Oh, that's the one. Was a Steelbook you had? Okay, so that's the same.
Well, not that I had. Well, it's the one that I've been watching. As far as I know, is out of print. But I think I could get it on Amazon for like around $100 Canadian. I don't know. I'll have to look again. I might. I don't know.
This one's cheap. I was trying to see if it was Mill Creek. This one's $20.
Oh wow. Okay, well, I'll have to look into that further. Because, yes, it's definitely something I would like to have on Blu-ray. As much as the DV looks good. Because it deserves to. But,
yeah, that is Mill Creek. Okay. I finally see the logo.
But I also just really like... I like the characters in this quite a bit. Particularly the detective himself.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually one of my favorite characters because he's it's hard to describe that kind of character, but I've talked about it before. Like in the movie 7, one of my favorite characters in all movies in Seven is the character that Morgan Freeman plays, Detective Somerset. And I always liked him because he was a very realistic, down to earth character, but he seemed very virtuous, but not in like an overdone way. Because in a lot of movies, you have heroic characters, but they're kind of overly heroic, and they're running around and they're, I don't know, doing overly heroic things, which I like to see in movies. It's fun, but it's not as realistic. I like somebody like Somerset who, he's just a good cop, basically, and he's a good person. And even though he's seen all sorts of horrors, he still has like his head on his shoulders, like because you see Brad Pitt's character can't handle it, right? Like Brad Pitt starts taking things personally and getting obsessed, and it all winds up horribly for Brad Pitt's character. Whereas Somerset is more well adjusted. I kind of feel that way. Now, this is a weird comparison, but I kind of do feel that way about the detective in this movie, in that he's not like overly heroic or anything, but he's very competent. He's good at what he does, and he's good at not being overwhelmed by the situation, I guess. I mean, it's funny because he does say that he is. He says, like, Metropolis itself overwhelms him. He'd never been to a place like it, and you can see, like, the whole time he's, like, staring around in wonder, and it's all crazy to him. Even in that scene I talked about in the in the superintendent's office, in the background with the big, weird, crazy fish swimming around. He's, like, distracted by it because he's never seen anything like that before. But, I mean, at the end of the day, he's good at his job, and he stays on, and he more or less accomplishes what he set out to do, except for the things that are beyond his control. He can't arrest Lawton because Lawton's dead. But he finds Lawton, finds out everything Lawton was doing, and makes the connection between him and the Duke. So I don't know. I've just always really enjoyed his character. Let's get his name up here.
Yeah, it's extremely Japanese, his name.
Yeah.
I was going to try to pronounce it, but I don't remember exactly what it was. It's like Satasuki or something like that. So.
It's Shinisaku, I guess. Shinisaku-ban and his nephew, Kenichi. And while Kenichi can be a bit annoying, I also do like their dynamic because, okay, he's a private detective, and that's his nephew, and he can only be 13, 14, right? Like 14 tops. But I like how much trust he puts in Kenichi. Like, when they go to Lawton's lab, it's a fiery inferno. The place is coming down, and they, like, rush in. He's like, you check out the back. Like, he tells them to be careful, but, like, he's not saying, you're just a kid, stay back. He's like, no, go get him. Like, he trusts him completely throughout the movie, which I kind of like. And even after he and Tima disappear and fall to the further levels, when he's looking for him with Pero's like, I hope your nephew's okay. He's like, he's fine. He knows how to take care of himself. I'm like,
he falls through levels all the time.
Yeah. And there's a dangerous psychopath chasing them for no reason. I mean, Rock's kind of a one-note character, but you almost kind of appreciate it from that. Okay, he loves his father. He's super devoted to his father, and he hates robots. And he solves every problem by shooting it.
Yeah.
That's basically Rock's character in a nutshell. Because at first it's like, okay, Rock hates robots and doesn't think anything of killing them, but like a lot of people do. But Rock will also mow down human beings like they're nothing too. He shoots several people just because they inconvenience him. So Rock is like a dangerous psychopath and you understand it because he's grown up with crazy power and privilege.
Right.
The Duke is his adoptive father, and the Duke basically runs the city behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. And he's the head of this crazy fascist group called the Mardukes that just push people around and shoot robots. So you can understand how Rock has just gone insane with power over time. So I do appreciate that about his character.
Well,
and some of his lines are just funny.
People that grow up like that,
Yeah. And Rock is young. He's probably in like 2021 or something like that. But yeah, I like the part where he's actually chasing Tima and Kenichi, and he's trying to get to another section, and some of the guards hold him up there, and they're like, "There's no firearms printed through here. Let me see your ID." And he's like, "Get out of my way! I'm Rock. I'm a Marduk, you idiot!" Because he's just used to like being able to do whatever he wants. Right. So something that actually makes this movie somewhat similar to Akira, which we did, is playing in the background of this movie is that in both movies, the government in place is extremely unstable. In the case of Akira, you've got, like, again, a whole section of the city that's all bombed out and full of crime, including, like, Kaneda and his gang. And then you've got, like, a part of the city that acts like everything's normal. And then you have a government that's trying to piece everything together and hold it together, and they're failing horribly. And it's all by corrupt people. And you'll see in Akira that eventually, like, they're planning coups against each other.
Right.
which doesn't really matter in the grand plot of Akira, but at the start it is. And that same thing happens in this movie. Whereas Duke Red, while he's called the Duke, he has no political position. We don't really know what his job is. Like he's some sort of industrialist. I don't know. And they ask him early on in the press conference as if he's thinking about going into politics. He's like, oh, no, you're in fine shape here with the president. But then you find out that the president is conspiring with the military to accuse the Duke of treason, even though at the time they have no idea if he's trying to do anything treasonous or not. They're just uncomfortable with the power he has. And then the Duke flips the military to his side and they execute the president. And towards the end of the movie, suddenly the Duke is the power in the city. And he seems like his idea is to start World War III just because he can. So there's a lot of political maneuvering going on. And I always thought it was interesting. They wanted to oust the Duke before I think they even knew he was plotting anything. But they weren't wrong because he was absolutely plotting something to take over the city entirely and have a superhuman robot rule the world from it. So, like, it's kind of funny. I don't know. I just found that funny. They all act buddy-buddy, but it's just like, yeah, we got to get rid of the Duke. He's getting too much power. It's like, even though we don't know he's doing anything. And then the Duke preempts them. He's like, you're damn right I'm doing something more than you could. And of course, caught in the middle of that is the lower class revolutionaries led by Atlas. They get tricked by the president's men because they just want to use that revolution as just sort of a cover so they can arrest the Duke in the confusion. But they get outmaneuvered. Plus, you have like a brief conversation between Atlas and Pero, where Pero, as a non-human, says, like, why must humans solve all their problems through violence? And Atlas, like, agrees that he doesn't have any satisfying answer for it. It's just like, I don't know. It's true. We're just ruled by our emotions and we're violent, and that's how we seem to solve everything. Which is a very sad commentary on the world. Again, because we're looking at it right now, too. We talk about political solutions and diplomatic solutions, and yet there's still war all over the place and people that simply won't make peace. And I'm not going to get into anything too specific there. I'm just saying it's very sad and frustrating. And wait till those robots get thrown into the mix. It'll make it all the more complicated. I think you're muted.
I was going to say we seem like we're not very far away from something like this. People complaining that the computers stole their jobs, stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically how Metropolis worked, I guess, is they developed these robots, which helped them build enormous wealth and power, but it came at the expense of their own working class, who just became this useless class, as Atlas says. It's like there's no jobs, there's no healthcare, there's no education for the kids. We're all living in slums, and there's nothing for us to do. So it makes sense that they lash out against the robots who basically replace them with their labor. And then, again, it's sort of ambiguous. It's that whole AI is a crapshoot thing, where you have robots that seem like nothing more than soulless automatons, and then you have ones that definitely seem much more sentient, like Pero, and of course Tima, who's supposed to be the ultimate example of them. And the great tragedy of her is because she was born sort of prematurely with Rock attacking the lab, is that she doesn't know she's a robot. So you have that whole revelation. Right. Eventually is when Rock, and she doesn't know she's a robot, and neither does Kenichi. And you get a little coming of age stuff going on with Kenichi. Again, I know he's a bit of an annoying character, but you can sort of see his point of view, what it would be like. So he's this quiet, shy boy, very polite to a fault, who hangs out with his uncle. Yeah, he's probably not popular with the girls. And he's at that age. And now suddenly this pretty girl around his own age is not only like nice to him, but sort of completely dependent on him. Like, I mean, these are the type of things like lonely losers like I would have like dreamt of. It's like, she really needs my help, And so he gets that. And then you see a few times she actually makes him blush and makes him uncomfortable. And then eventually he has the revelation, she's not actually human. Must be kind of like, we never really get to see, there's no time, things move too quickly. We don't get to see how that fully affects Kenichi, because by then events are happening too fast. All he knows is like he still really cares about Tima and doesn't want to see her turned into a soulless weapon. And spoilers, people, we do full spoilers in the show. That's what happened. I mean, the other thing that might take you by surprise, if you know anything, if you see previews for this movie, or if you are are used to seeing or have seen Osamu Tezuka's rather cartoony art is that this is a super dark movie. By the time the movie is over, the only main characters who aren't dead are the detective and his nephew. Everyone else is dead. And many other people are dead too from a revolution that was pointless. And if you care about the robots, many of them are turned to scrap. Like, so it's very bleak. I mean, the ending still has some hope for it. I mean, they avoided World War III, and only part of the city was destroyed. But we don't really know what's going to happen too. It's very ambiguous. So at the end of the movie, the Duke is gone. It seems like most of his forces are gone. The president is gone. The upper echelons of the military are gone. We don't even know who the hell's going to start running the city. Like, the city's completely at loose ends when the movie ends. I mean,
a bunch of messed up robots.
I mean, you'd like to think that maybe some of the people that survived the revolution could have stepped in and, I don't know, made some sort of committee or deal with any of the local infrastructure that was still intact. But it's a very open-ended ending in that we don't really know where Metropolis is going to go from here. But they do give us a little bit of hope, and I do like the ending. You got some sunshine and things like that. And the Who Am I?
And so he and Timu actually, is that her name? Or
Tima.
Robot's name? The Tima?
Tima.
They have their own like robot repair store or something like that.
At what point?
At the end, it just is kind of like a during the credits. It's just like a still.
Oh, does it show that they stay?
Yeah.
Okay, because at the end, like it's not really clear how long they're going to stay before they go back to Japan. He just says, "I'd like to stay here for a while," but again, I don't know if that just meant like the rest of the afternoon or he meant longer because he was just running around the wreckage. But yeah. But I'm looking at the English voice acting cast, who I thought were quite good. Again, nobody you'd really recognize her. Really? That's Tony Pope doing Shinsaku, the detective's voice. I really like his sort of a gruff but friendly type of voice. I don't know. The Duke, of course, Jameson Price does really good. He's got a very deep, booming voice, which I've heard in other things too, because he's one of those English voice actors that's done quite a bit of anime. So I've heard him in some other things. Although I still say this is probably his most high-profile role, but really good. But speaking of the cartoony style, he's got people might also be taken aback by like how Osamu Tezuka sometimes likes to draw people with huge noses. So there's quite a few of those, including the Duke, throughout the movie, which some people might think kind of undercuts its seriousness, but I don't know. I'm too used to it. He just liked that cartoony style, but that didn't mean he couldn't do more serious stuff. Although, I mean, he did drop it, because if you look at some of his more serious and dark manga works like MW or Ayoko, like he does drop that. Like you don't see the cartoony-esque characters with the big noses. But Metropolis was way before that, and while it had serious themes, I think it was still, I don't think it was necessarily supposed to be super dark. I will tell you, from what I've read about the manga, this movie is much more bleak and dark than what happens in the book, the original comic.
You said the movie is more bleak than the.
From what I could tell, like I haven't read the manga, but I've read things about it. But yeah, I mean, I can't really remember how the other ends, but I mean, this ends again with a good portion of the city destroyed, most of the main characters dead. Again, the only real positive is they stopped Tima from turning into the weapon and her setting off Armageddon. But apart from that, the city is in pretty bad. Was in pretty bad shape. Afterwards, Kenichi searches the ruins and discovers a group of robots that salvage some of Tima's parts in an effort to rebuild her. While Shinsuko and many other human survivors are evacuated, Kenichi chooses to remain behind to help the survivors rebuild. A photograph shown during the credits ends reveals Kenichi opened a robot workshop named after him and Tima. So there you go. So, I mean, Tima is dead, but he does decide to stay and open that repair shop. It seems like his uncle doesn't stay with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, hell, who knows? Maybe he died of complications of the explosion.
No, he's alive. We saw the. Well, yeah, I'd hate to think that. It's bleak enough without thinking that he might die.
It was all
like
the
and he is my favorite character. I like him a lot.
asbestos.
He is an efficient detective. It just takes a while to put things together. And I don't know. He just sort of represents the old world and the old. And he even mentions that. Like he says, I know I talk in cliches and stuff. And he's like, but I like old sayings and I like old fashioned stuff, which makes sense because he's an older guy, at least in his 60s. So there's a little bit of that meeting the modern world and being kind of overwhelmed by it. There are a few clunky moments of exposition, particularly with Rock, because I like where the first scene between Rock and Duke Red where he calls him father. He's like, I'm not your father, which, okay, that would probably be said. The next line would not be said, right? He's like, during the last war, you were an orphan, so I took you in. It's like, you would need to tell him that. He knows that. But thanks for telling us.
Shit.
Thank you for telling us. Because the whole thing was, you find out, he had a real daughter named Tima who died in some way, which is another tie into, which again is not in the manga, but would tie into the manga and things of Astro Boy or Adam. It's the whole idea is that Tenma had a boy, Tobio, who died in a car accident, and then he made a robotic replica of him, who would be Adam. But then getting frustrated with him because he wasn't just like him, and because he couldn't grow, he gets rid of him. So that's the other thing. Like, I don't know if enough people actually remember that or are aware of that detail in the origin story. Because I think a lot of people, because I know back when I was a kid and I watched the 80s show, I think it was lost on me that Tenma was his creator. I thought that the guy he was living with, Professor Okinazu, the head of the Ministry of Science, I figured he was his creator. Tenma would show up every now and again and say weird cryptic things, but I don't think I made the connection that Tenma had actually created him and then gotten rid of him, and it was, had basically forsaken him, and that his father figure was actually Okinazu, who did not make him. And that's really, of course, played up in this, because you really get to see some of the darkness of Tenma's character again. When you think about it, you think of how that really would clash with like a Western cartoon. They'd be like, that's too much. We can't have his creator throwing him out. I mean, he winds up being sold to a circus, which we talked about way when we did AI, where I blathered on about what a shameless ripoff it was of Adam, where they have like a boy replacing another boy, but then they decide he's inconvenient and they get rid of him. And then he winds up in a robot circus where robots are destroyed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's spot on. For that movie.
Yeah.
Which is one I'll never watch again.
I might, but see our episode on that. We were quite critical of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had our reasons.
Oh yeah, like no, I haven't changed my mind on it. The whole reason I think I wanted to do the movie back in the day was I remember not liking it initially, and the whole point was like around the time we were talking about how years later a lot of people were like, it's actually a masterpiece, or it's misunderstood. It's one of those reevaluation situations where a lot of people were looking at it differently, saying, it was misunderstood in its time. It was a lot better. So that's why we did it. And neither of us felt that way. You're like, no, not this one.
Well, I mean, it's, it was Kubrick's, project, right? So,
yeah.
That would have been a completely different movie if Kubrick had made that versus Spielberg.
Yeah. And Spielberg,
they're just different directions.
Spielberg to this day says, like, the sentimental stuff at the ending. He says, that was all Kubrick, not me, which seems completely against what we know about each of them, but that is what he said.
It's, I don't buy that at all.
I find it very hard to buy given their track records. That's what he said. He said, he wanted to tack on more sentimentals.
It's exactly like other Spielberg movies. It's got the sappy bullshit in there.
Yeah.
But, Love Spielberg, but
Yeah. I mean, Kubrick definitely would have been aware of Adam, I'm sure. I mean, people in the West wouldn't really have known too much about him in the early days, but the original 60s cartoon did air in America. That was black and white. As I said, back in those early episodes, Rintaro, the director of this movie, actually worked at that animation studio, Mushi Productions. So he does have that tie to Osamu Tezuka. But another thing is, I think the role of robots in general, I think, is not as important in the original manga. Like Michi, who is the Tima character, is important. But I think while they have robots in the city, I don't think they have any sort of like commentary on like their position in society or what people think. And I think that's because it was a little early before he I think it was really with the Atom comics that he really came up with a world where that was like kind of the whole point. You had humans and robots living together in society, and they had their various interactions, and people had their various opinions of them. And then you had one really exceptional one in Atom who seemed much more human than the others and really kind of flipped things around. Because often Adam's viewpoint was he was a robot, but he seemed very human, and he was often shocked and dismayed by the casual cruelty people showed towards robots. But he still felt, but it was still his mission to serve the humans, and that was really what was going on. I don't think there's much of that in the original manga. I think they lifted that from the Astro Boy Atom stuff and put it into this, which makes sense. Because it's interesting because I don't even know if they use the term robot when it comes to Michi. They talk more about him being an artificial person, which is really interesting because that's more like what the original 1927 Fritz Lang movie was. The robots there are more supposed to be like artificial beings, which ties into the earliest mention of robots in fiction, which is the Czech play Rossum's Universal Robots, or something like that. There was this Czech play from the early 20s, and that's where the word robot comes from, which usually just meant worker or slave, depending on how you.
Rossum.
Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, so I think we did talk about it. You know, somebody brought it up a long time ago. I think it was that lunatic Kenny actually mentioned it once when we were talking about AI. He brought it up, but yeah, I've read it. But anyway, but what was interesting there is in that play, it's not like they're robotic constructs made of metal and gears and wires. It was more that they were artificially made human beings. And that play is about how like this factory or whatever is, or the society is using them, and of course, eventually they get overthrown, and I think they take over the whole world. It's about that. And then Metropolis is like a smaller version of that, except it ties human beings into it too, because it's not just robots that are downtrodden. It's about, well, you saw it more recently than I did, about how like one woman sort of inspires them, and then isn't like they make a robotic copy of her to like confuse the masses or something in that. It's like they don't rally around the robot in that. It's like the robot is almost an antagonist in that, isn't it?
Oh no, which one are you talking about?
The silent film, the Fritz Lang movie. Because because you have like the real woman, but then don't like the bad guys, like aren't they the ones that make like the robotic copy of her, and they send it down to like confuse or I don't know, stir up the masses or something? I don't know. It's a bit different what the dynamic is there. But you know how like in this movie when they're talking about like the weird crazy like weapon system the team is going to be hooked up to, it does this thing that does like some sort of like solar flare and causes sunspots. That's actually a bigger part of the plot of the original manga. The idea being that Lawton, who's not such a bad guy, like in this, like he's like a mad scientist archetype, right? Like he's a criminal, and that's why Kenichi and his uncle are there. They're tracking him for all his illegal activities, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in the manga, I don't think he's necessarily a criminal, and he's been trying to make artificial people. Let's see if I can get to the part right. I just want to make sure I'm not mixing this up if I'm going to get into it. So he's also called Lawton. Sun is covering, yeah. Something happens which causes the sunspots, causing radiation levels to rise. This is the manga. Lawton, back in his laboratory, had almost given up on his 30-year experiment into synthetic cells. Sorry. Wait, I'm just going past the digression there. Cells. I'm losing. I keep losing around. I'd almost given up on his 30-year experiment into synthetic cells when he noticed the sunspots had irradiated his tank of synthetic proteins and brought them to life. So then from there, the Duke orders him to create this artificial being using that. So for that one, somehow the sunspots were the breakthrough for him to like make life. So it seemed to have less to do with robots. But here's one little ambiguity in the movie I've always thought about. Is one of the reasons Lawton is a criminal, and one of the reasons why the detective is chasing him and he's wanted for human rights violations is because he's supposedly an organ trafficker, right? They say that he's been using the black market of human organs in his experiments. And at one point early on, when the Duke visits his laboratory and asks him about Tima, he says, "I've heard you use like real organs." He says, "Oh, no, I wouldn't do anything illegal." And he says, synthetic's better anyway. We know he's lying that he doesn't use them because we know that he does use them. But what he says about Tima makes sense because it seems like in the context of making somebody like her, would you want to make synthetic stuff that will work better? But I'm wondering if they're implying that, yeah, he definitely has used real human organs for some of Tima, and that's supposed to explain why she has seems more human than other people, maybe because part of her actually has real human parts. I don't know. It's never made clear.
The biological, the skin on top of the, I guess the robot frame.
Mm-hmm.
Is that supposed to be like living tissue? Like a Terminator scenario, maybe?
I'm not sure, because what they're saying is if you believe Lawton, who is a liar, he says, "Oh, I don't use that at all. She's 100% synthetic. No, nothing, no actual organic parts to her." But we know that the whole reason that he's being chased is because he does use organic parts. So it's kind of ambiguous what he's put into Tima. And later on, like when Rock meets up with her, he's just saying, the craftsmanship is exquisite. Like your hair, your skin, like everything's like you would never guess you're a robot. You're like a masterpiece. And she's, at that point, still doesn't know she's a robot, so she's all freaked out by it. So it's kind of left ambiguous what exactly he used on her. I think it's implied he must have used something, and that's maybe supposed to somewhat explain why she is such a breakthrough. Is that he is using some actual organic material. But it is interesting that in the original manga, the whole sunspot thing is part of why she was created. And this is just a byproduct of the weapon they're using. And in this one, it's different too, in that, I think the same thing was the doctor. Yeah, there's another doctor called Bell, which gets mucks things up, who's not, of course, in the movie at all. But we know that Lawton knows that she's something special too, because think about it. Lawton is a mad scientist who cares only really about his work. He's on the run from various law enforcement agencies in the world. He's an international criminal, but he's come to Metropolis, which is a huge city and a great place for him to hide. And now he has a really powerful and influential and wealthy backer in the Duke, who sets him up with a huge lab in a hidden part of the city where he can do whatever the fuck he wants. But he's willing to leave all that behind so he can take Tima. Because we know he's going to betray the Duke, right? As soon as the Duke leaves, he says, "I'm not handing her over to him. I'm going to take you with me and we'll go somewhere else." So he thinks Tima is so valuable that she's worth giving up the whole setup he has and having the Duke and everybody else come after him. Of course, it doesn't work out that way. Rock kills him, but it really drives home how exquisite and special Tima is. And you wonder what his plans for her would have been. With the Duke, it's, well, I'm trying to replace my lost daughter, but also she's going to complete this insane weapon systems I made so we can dominate the world. And that backfires horribly because of the malfunctions and because of what she's been through. She's just like, I'll just eliminate humanity because I don't like you.
Yeah, because you're mean.
Yeah.
You're being mean to the robots.
Okay, one more thing is way back when I saw this movie, and again, speaking of it has that cool jazzy soundtrack, is of course when Rock hits the self-destruct on the main Zerot building there, we get one of those juxtaposition scenes of music that doesn't necessarily match what's going on. You see it in a lot of things. The best example I can think of is probably Good Morning Vietnam, right? There's that scene in Good Morning Vietnam where it's a big montage of the horrors of war while What a Wonderful World plays. In this one, we once again have one of the prominent African American jazz-esque people of the 20th century. That was Louis Armstrong. And this we have Ray Charles. We have Ray Charles, I Can't Stop Loving You, playing while this crazy destruction ensues. I always thought it worked and was always fitting, but I had a friend at the time I was at university with. He said he was baffled by it, and he thought it didn't work at all. And he actually borrowed the movie from me for a while. And he said he watched the movie with his brother. And when after the movie was over, they both agreed that the music didn't fit at all. And they went to the trouble of playing that scene over again several times while playing different CDs they had to try to come up with music that they thought was better. But I always thought it worked. I think it's just one of those juxtaposition things. It's a contrast, right?
That's the intention. Yeah, it works.
Yeah. I mean, it fits the soundtrack because we've already got that jazz type thing going on, that retro thing. I love a song anyway. That's one of the great songs of the 20th century. I really love that song.
But they knew what what they were going for, with the juxtaposition. So I don't know why they would be so adamantly against it.
Yeah, I was confused that my friend thought it was so unfitting. I thought, I don't know. It seems like it's a pretty good contrast, because you have the horrible destruction, but you also have Kenichi, who won't give up on Tima, no matter how desperate the situation is. She's actively trying to kill him, and he's still, trying to save her. You get that desperation. I mean, he falls several levels, several times, to the point where it's almost comical. And then finally, he catches up to her, and she, grabs her. I love that part where, her hand's all messed up, and, the fingers are, going out, and then they go and grab him by the throat.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so visceral. It's like, oh, shit, how far is this movie going to go? Is she going to, choke the life out of Kenichi? Doesn't go quite that far, but the movie goes pretty damn far.
She was close. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I always thought that music worked really well. And I mean, I'm a sucker for that song, but I think it fits really well.
Yeah, I mean, you could insert any, normal happy song into that and it would have the same effect, I would think. But yeah, it's a good song.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it sort of fits that jazzy retro aesthetic.
Right.
To a certain sense, too. Because there's also that scene, I don't know what the song is, but there's another sort of old jazzy song, I think with an African-American singer singing, that part where they're just in the slums together, just sort of recuperating. And there's that scene where some of the sunlight has finally gotten down and she's staring up at it and she looks angelic because she's got the pigeon on her shoulder and the pigeon puts out a wing. And you have that song. I don't know what that song is, but that's more of a depressing, sad song, but yeah.
Yeah. Lots of things coming together to make this movie, lots of it, it seems from what you're describing, they kind of picked things they liked from certain things and adapted. Loosely adapted is what Wikipedia said.
Yeah, again, it's a loose adaptation of the original manga with quite a few elements from the Fritz Lang film put into it. I guess it would probably be the best way of putting it.
Which is cool. I mean, I like stuff like that. You don't know what you're going to get.
Here's cool. The part talking about Rock. Rock wasn't in the original manga, and according to the writer of the film. Oh, by the way, when I was talking about how famous the movie is, I said, oh, it's based on a movie, because it's okay, what we got? We got a movie that's based on a manga by the most famous manga artist of all time. It's directed by one of the most famous anime directors of all time, in Rintaro. I also forgot to mention that the script was only written by Katsuhiro Otomo, the writer and artist behind Akira. He wrote the script, for God's sake. I forgot to point that out at the start. So, absolute giants of the field in this movie, and yet it seems like most people have just sort of forgotten about it.
So a lot of that could probably be attributed to him, huh?
I mean, he is the script writer at the end of the day, so I would assume somebody like Rintaro would have had input. But yeah, I would say most of it would be a Katsuhiro Otomo. He is credited as the screenwriter.
Well, I figure we could
I'm just trying to see if the reception here.
We could kind of get a little lighthearted. Orc asked a question earlier.
Okay.
No, we're not going there.
They should cut it out, is what they should do. There's my really my real hot take, my controversial take is like I wish it would stop. Yeah. Oh boy. But I'm just trying to see about how it goes here. PG-13 in the US. It actually aired at some point on Adult Swim, but that would have been back before I knew it existed. Metropolis received highly positive reviews, 87% on Rotten Tomatoes. Remarkable technical achievement, eye-popping good. Roger Ebert gave it 4 out of 4 stars, calling it one of the best animated films I have ever seen. So, I mean, it had good reception. Like, I don't get why it seems to be, I don't want to say forgotten, and maybe I've just been looking in the wrong places, talking to the wrong people, reading the wrong things. But I mean, as somebody who's like the last, especially 20 years, like been in anime circles and, you know, see comments and things like, I've never seen anybody, for instance, say like, this is what got me into anime. I've never seen that and things like that. That kind of surprises me.
Yeah. That is
I think I don't know. All I know is things I've read about a man who died when I was 6 years old, and I wasn't even aware of until after he was dead. But I think Osamu Tezuka would have liked it, because Osamu Tezuka, even though he's the most famous manga artist of all time, his dream was animation. What he wanted was animation. Mushi Studios was his dream to make that. And the breakthrough was to make that very first animated show, that Atom show in 1963. And you know, he spent the rest of his life, he still continued drawing manga, but animation was his love. And I don't know how he couldn't have loved this if he could have seen it, because the animation is top notch. It's ridiculously good. And I think it captures the spirit of the work quite well. And again, you're saying, well, you didn't technically read the work. No, I didn't. I've only like read, you know, synopses and things in here and there. But I've read quite a lot of Osamu Tezuka's work. I own a lot of it. The stuff that does get translated and brought over, which doesn't last long. I'll say this: anytime like an Osamu Tezuka thing gets released, like buy it, because it's going to go out of print really fucking fast.
Mm-hmm. Seems like it.
Like, it breaks my heart I can't complete Phoenix. There's I think 12 volumes of it. I think I have half of them, and one of them doesn't really even count, because there's one called Early Works, which was like an abortive attempt that he did back in the late 50s before he started. So it has stuff that he would use later on, but it's not actually considered canon or part of it. And that's one of the ones I own. But yeah, I don't remember now, but a couple of these, not this specific one, but at least 2 of these, and also all 3, I have 2 here, but all 3 of the Japanese versions I have of Pluto. I got in New York City back in 2013. Kind of blows my mind when I think how old Pluto is. Like, Pluto is like being done, I think, in Japan, like right around 2003, because 2003 was a big year, because that was in the world of Astro Boy, or Atom. 2003 was his birth. So it's like sometime in April 2003 that he was supposedly born. So over in Japan, they had a huge celebration marking the occasion, and they launched a new show and everything, which didn't do so well. But what also came out of that was the project to do Pluto. And by like, I think 2008 or 2009, it was getting translated and brought over here. Because I remember it was at least that old. Because I can remember some of the earliest things I ever did on YouTube back in 2009. I'm talking about Pluto. So. Mm-hmm. So it's so cool all these years later again to see the Netflix series, which is perfection. Gotta love it. So I'll have to watch it again really soon. It's
just to, you know, knowing where we came from as far as anime goes, like it was not readily available for me at all. I mean, there were VHS tapes that were extremely expensive, you know, and that was pretty much it, you know. And you know, Akira was one of those like traded tapes, you know, like, you know, people would trade, you know. That's how I saw it, is I had never even heard of it, and saw it, you know, fell in love with it in the, you know, later 90s.
Yeah. See, I had the sort of similar, but it's frustrating in that I'd heard of it, but I couldn't find it. I knew about it for at least 3 or 4 years before I finally saw it. And like you said, I saw that original VHS version, which is a different English translation from what you get now. And I've talked about it before, and I certainly talked about it in the Akira show that we did. Well, what sucks is I wish I could get a version that had that original one too, with Cam Clark as Kaneda. It's not as good. In some ways, it's kind of dumb. My favorite part in the whole thing is there's a scene, and I know if you watch our Akira episode, I say the same thing, but whatever. This is years later. Now everybody remembers. But there's a scene where Tetsuo has gone in search of Akira, and he goes to the Olympic Stadium, and he's finding like the secret elevator that goes way down to the lower levels. And at one point, he's like looking around this room at like the equipment and stuff. And I don't remember what he says in the new version, but in that original one, the first English dub, he goes, carelessness, utter carelessness. And you're just like, what? Like, you don't know what he's referring to or what he's thinking about. He just says that. But yeah, I haven't seen that since way back. Actually, around the same time I saw this was 2001. So I knew what Akira was in the late 90s, but I never got to see it until I was at college in the fall of 2001. And my friend and roommate, I don't remember how he got a hold, but we got a hold of the tape, and that's how we watched it. That original. And this being one of the first DVDs I bought, Akira was one of the first DVDs I bought.
Mm-hmm.
Except that years later, I was able to get a nice Blu-ray of Akira, whereas I still need to get the Blu-ray of this.
But, I don't think Adult Swim, you mentioned earlier, I don't think that really gets enough credit for really bringing a lot of anime to, North American audiences that wouldn't have seen it otherwise, because, kids now that grew up like in the 2000s, were young kids in the 2000s, and now, like, I mean, they love anime.
Yeah, and it's everywhere, and it's part of pop culture.
It's everywhere.
It's crazy how much it's changed. Like, and I go into my bookstore, and there's this massive manga section. Yeah. It's huge.
Yeah,
that didn't exist when I was a kid or in the 90s or anything. Like, somewhere in like the late 2000s is where it really became a mainstream thing. I'd say sometime around 2008, 2009. But before that, it was fringe, and it was hard to find. And I've made this sort of complaint before, and I mean, that's what it is when you're used to growing up as a sort of geek, right? Same thing. Like, I was a big comic book fan. Comics. Yeah. Now, still a lot of people don't read comics, but they're much more aware of them. You have big multi-billion-dollar Marvel movies and things like that. There's people old enough now to talk about like the Nolan films, like being their gateway when they were a kid. I'm like, you were a kid in 2005. Yeah. But anyway, to my point, it's good. But I also do kind of remember the days where it was different, I didn't tell people in the 90s I was into comics, because comics was like geeky, childish stuff,
nerd shit. Yeah.
Yeah. So totally. I kept my mouth shut about it. And as far as anime goes, I've told this in various ways in the show before, but whatever. So as I said, some of my favorite shows growing up were animes, but it was before I really knew what anime was. Like I said, the aforementioned Astro Boy show from the 80s. There was that one. There was the other big one was Voltron, and there was a very short-lived show that only existed for a few episodes called Saber Riders, and those were some of my favorite shows as a little kid in the late 80s, early 90s. Now, I did take note that they had a lot of crazy names on the credits. Right. Even as a little kid, I knew Japanese names when I saw them, but it wasn't until about 95, 96 where the first boom started to happen over here, the smaller one, with like Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball. They were the big ones, right?
Yeah.
But for me, my anime moment where I really got committed, it's tied into what you said about Adult Swim. Now, Adult Swim was never in Canada until later, when you could like buy it as a pay channel or like that. So I didn't even know it existed. And you guys had Cartoon Network. We had the Canadian version of that called Teletoon. Teletoon started in very early 98, I think. So I don't remember if it was late 97 or early 98, but it was around that time. It was Christmas holidays. It was a few days after Christmas, and that channel was brand new. And when it was brand new, it didn't have set programming, which was the crazy thing about Teletoon. It just had random stuff that they threw on. So this is a few days after Christmas, either 97 or 98, and Ryan is staying over at my house for a sleepover, and we're just flipping channels late at night. And we've had this conversation a million times, and we won't bring it up again. But again, back in the 90s and stuff, TV was different late at night, right? Like now TV has no meaning. But back in the day, once you got past a certain time, more interesting adult stuff came on late at night. So you're doing that thing, and all of a sudden, I flipped a channel, and it was about 15, 20 minutes into the movie Ninja Scroll. Never saw it before, never heard of it. It's a part where We missed the opening scene with Chubei fighting the guy on the bridge and stuff. We're at the scene where the clan of ninjas are hopping through the trees and they get attacked by that crazy guy with the stone skin, and he throws the big thing that cuts a bunch of them. So that's what we come up on. Ninjas hopping through the trees when all of a sudden like this big double-bladed thing comes ripping through and cuts a bunch of them in half. So I'd never seen violence like that in a cartoon in my life. And then, we're hooked from then on. And later on, like in that same scene, he finds the main girl and starts to fucking rape her before Junpei comes and interrupts the whole scene. And then we watched the rest of the movie. So that was an anime moment for me. Like I'd seen anime before that. I kind of knew what it was, but that was probably the moment. And the good thing was that wasn't the only one that they showed in the early days. They also showed a mech movie called Pat Labor, which is not really considered a classic in the pantheon of animes or even mech animes, but it was about sort of a futuristic city that had like a police force that would use these mechs. They made a sequel too called Pat Labor 2 in the early 90s, but that was on too, and I watched that. So those are important. And speaking again of Rintaro, and this is a different channel, but again, you guys had the Sci-Fi Network. Mm-hmm. We have a Canadian equivalent that's called Space. And Space was the exact same thing as Teletoon. In the early days, no set programming. They just kind of threw stuff at the wall. Yeah. And in decades since, they never did it again. But one night, this time I'm alone, late up at night, and on Space they are showing Galaxy Express. I have no idea why, but I was entranced, and I watched it, with commercials and everything, late into the night. So those were great seminal moments. And now I think about how different it all is. And I mean, it's good to have it at your fingers. And and the internet is a part of it too, because I'll bring up one more example. In fact, I'm going to be right back.
Yeah, it's so, such a common thing to say, but, finding stuff like that, I don't know, it felt more special to me, I guess, than, wow, this was on, and I happened to see it. And,
yeah. Definitely cool when you can catch something like that, especially when you have like no context. Like I said, I didn't know what Ninja Scroll was. Never read about it, never heard of it. Just dropped into the deep end of horrific violence and then sexuality just thrown at me.
I just don't know if it's, is it the same when you're on Netflix and you just, click a random anime? Probably not. You probably don't have that level of excitement. I can't imagine.
I mean, no. I mean, there's a whole section on anime now.
I mean, there's a entire app just for anime,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, good things. It makes it more available. More people get to see more stuff. Of course, good thing. But it is special when you happen upon stuff. And I'll give you one more really important example, because I only got this. This is another example of why it's good to have my international player. So I lamented that, like, I got my international player, and primarily I was using it to get UK editions of a lot of Hong Kong action movies and stuff. But then I found out, like, a lot of the time, just in the last couple of years, some of those ones were getting re-released in Region A here by like 88 Films or whatever. I was like, so it makes it kind of unnecessary. So I kind of have a mix. So I have some that are UK only, some that are Region A. But one thing that is good is if you're looking for certain things that might be out of print, sometimes if you can get it in a different region, like on Amazon, it's way cheaper. And this happened to me recently for this. I think I've talked to you this before. So this is the Region B version. So this is Serial Experiments Lane. It costs a fortune if you want to buy like Region A, at least where I could find it. But I got this much cheaper because this is Region B UK edition. But anyway, so going back to the summer of 1999, I'm now quite the savvy internet user, and there are sites about anime. So this is a direct consequence of what I've gone through before. So this is where I start watching early versions of my earliest interactions with various anime. And Serial Experiments Lane is just one of those ones where I just thought the thumbnail on the video looked interesting. Mm-hmm. So it came out in 98, but in 99 was when it got the English translation. So it wasn't a dub, it was subbed. And I just remember on this site that doesn't exist anymore. This is 1999, a long time ago, it's gone. But back when you could watch stuff for free, right? Like not everything was regulated and paid. You didn't have to make accounts for everything and passwords and all that bullshit. You just watched stuff, and that's what I did. It was a bit slower, but you watch stuff, and I watched Lane. And that was just a great moment, too, because sometimes things hit you at the right time. Like, I was 16 years old. I was a big fan of, like, alternative music, and, I never became really tech-savvy, like hackers or anything like that. But I was, kind of that cyberpunk aesthetic had meant a lot to me. So Lane is just an incredible thing. And it's one of those rare examples, and I brought it up, I was telling you a while ago, it's like, it's one of those really rare examples where they used a Western pop song instead of a Japanese song for the opening. And it's by a band called Boa. And it's, I don't know, it's just so perfect. Sometimes things just line up so perfect. Anyway, that show always meant a lot to me. And I rewatched it again recently. I just love it. I love everything about it. And it's also another example of just how different the Japanese sensibilities are. When you think that Lane, she's 14 years old, and even as a 14-year-old, she seems kind of childlike compared to like her friends and stuff. And the things she witnesses and goes through are just so horrific and awful. Like, I don't think it would ever occur to like Westerners, you know, to like have a protagonist that young be exposed to those things. I just loved it.
Yeah, it would be really
so
risque.
Like, this predates the fucking Matrix. Like the Matrix looks simple and childlike compared to the craziness of Lane, which is all about how like The Wired, which is basically cyberspace of the internet, but kind of different and a lot more dangerous. It starts with like one of Lane's classmates committing suicide, but then Lane and several of her classmates getting emails from her after her death saying that she wasn't really dead and she was now living in The Wired. And it's about Lane getting pulled into that world and discovering what's going on. And it's so nuts and it's so dark. And I love it so much. But yeah. So like you said, I mean, it's good. There's no wrong way to discover something. It's good if somebody who's younger is on Netflix or some streaming service and they're like, let's look at this anime. And it turns out to be one of their favorite animes. Great. But there really was something, like you said, about maybe more organically finding it on TV, or in this case, just being on like a random anime site, trying to see what I could learn and just saying that looks interesting. I don't know. Plus, it was very fitting to watch Lane on a computer because it's all about computers. So in a way, even though it's good to be out now, I can watch it on a big TV screen. It was kind of neat to just watch it sitting at a desktop in 1999. It felt appropriate for the subject matter at hand.
Yeah. I have a lot of memories around. Like, I used to have a portable DVD player and Blu-ray player later that was a piece of junk, but you know, I remember being on trips or wherever, and I remember where I was watching certain movies.
I'm still here.
You know,
I'm still here.
But yeah, you know, I just have lots of, you know, for some reason when I watch things, I, you know, attribute what's happening, like who I saw it with, you know, what happened that day with the movie. I don't know why that is, but
oh yeah, I think
you know, I can remember, you know, I saw this movie at this place with these people, you know, stuff like that.
Here's Belle, by the way. This is one of the ones by the director I talked about, Mamoru Hosoda. This is his latest movie. It's from 2021.
Okay.
But you got to get some of the others. His first like movie thing was actually one of the Digimon movies back in the late 90s. And I never got into Digimon. Don't give a shit. But it looks really good.
I know nothing about any of that.
Yeah.
Other than it was card game, or that was I don't know.
It was just a very shallow, you know, ripoff of Pokemon, except like they're digital monsters. You know, it's the same type of deal. Yeah.
Let's see how they did that one. And Yu-Gi-Oh, I think, is the one I'm thinking.
Yu-Gi-Oh! I can't even stand how Yu-Gi-Oh looks. So yeah, there's plenty of really popular animes, or at least popular in the West, that I never got
into any of that.
Yu-Gi-Oh was one, and that's all cards. Yeah, that's crazy cards, card fighting. So just like I was making that thing about how there's all sorts of big, you know, video game franchises I don't care about. Kind of the same thing with anime over here. There's some really big, like Naruto. Like Naruto's huge here. I see T-shirts for it all the time. Never watched it.
Never seen it.
Don't really care.
Kids love it. People love it. I mean, they're adults now, but you know, they were kids.
I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I've never looked interesting to me. I don't know. And one more thing on the note of what we're talking about stuff on TV and things is, I wonder if you get this feeling too. You probably do, because I figure younger people don't have this feeling. It's this feeling. It's so sometimes I'll be in the present. So I'm watching something on like a streaming service, or maybe even on disc or something like that. Right? The point is I have complete control over it. I can stop it when I want to stop it. But maybe I'm watching it and I have to do something, go to the bathroom or get something out of the kitchen. And I think I'm not going to stop it because I'm only going to be a moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do that because you don't think you're going to take that long. But when you're doing whatever you're doing, something makes it take longer. Do you get that sinking panic? Because I still do, even though I know I can stop it. And that comes back from being a kid and waiting for something to come on TV and you've been waiting for it. and you want to see it. But then your mom makes you do something, or you have to go to the bathroom or something,
yeah.
and every second counts. And by the time you know the commercial's over and you're missing it, you're thinking, I'm missing it. I still get that now, even knowing I can just go and undo it.
Yeah.
That happens to me. I'll be like, it's still playing. I'm missing it. And I'm like, you don't have to think about it. You can just back it up. You have full control. But I still get that feeling. And I wonder, I guess people now, younger people wouldn't get that because they don't
even get it. Yeah.
But I can just remember that was such a big thing because stuff was on when it was on and you had to watch it then. And you're a kid and you don't have control over your own time half the time. Your parents are going to make you do this or that, or some other distraction is going to come up. And all you want to do is watch your stupid 21-minute show and all 6 or 7 minutes of its stupid commercials. And you keep getting interrupted. And
I don't think kids would have any concept of that now.
And you're flying down the stairs. I can remember just flying down the stairs to get in front of the TV again because you don't want to miss a second of it.
Because that's it. It's on, and then that's it. You missed
it's gone.
It,
Yeah.
Like it may come on as a rerun later.
It may not. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's funny that I still get that weird sinking panic now for things that I'm fully in control of. It's like, it doesn't matter that you're missing it. I can just go in there and back it up, and that's that. But I still get that feeling. It's kind of funny.
Well, I mean, outside of sports, there's really no event television anymore. I mean, people would, you're talking about a season finale or a series finale of a big show. I mean, people would, get off work early and, make plans and stuff,
Yeah. I guess by the time I was old enough for that, I didn't care as much. But I can just remember it being a thing as a kid. For sure.
Yeah. I mean, briefly, basically my entire adult life, we've pretty much had DVR or something of that equivalent,
Right.
So
we made really good uses of VCR. We taped so much stuff back in the day. We had so many tapes. And my parents just want to get rid of them. I'm like, no, some of them are gold.
Yes.
And yet I don't even have my tape player here anymore. For a long time, I had a DVD/VHS combo. And even when I bought it, those things were already going out. I knew I had to get it because these are going to disappear, which is why I got it. And I had it here for a long time, but being part VCR, it's huge. So it's actually back at my parents' house again. But because I'm like, if I put it here, where the fuck would I put it?
On those, can you just record directly? Can you record from a DVD or? Well, I guess you would record from a VHS. Well, I guess you can't record on those, so never mind.
No, I couldn't do anything between them, but it was mainly so I could still have something to play tapes, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you need to take those old tapes and convert them to digital somehow.
I know. I think I told this before, but the most perfect tape of my life, the Christmas '86 tape, we actually tried that years ago, and they only got 15 minutes of it. I'm like, are you kidding? This is like 5 hours. Like the rest didn't work, so the tape must be ruined, which really sucked. Because I've said before, that tape was touched by God. Every second about it is perfect in a way that, if you set out to do it, you couldn't do it because it was just random, right? It was just whatever my mother or father or whoever hit record or play at that moment to capture what was going on circa Christmas '86. Some of the things are so crazy, because it opens with Disney's Christmas Gift, which was a Christmas special that showed shorts. But what's funny is after you get about an hour and a half in, other stuff has popped up that's not related to it. But by the time you get to the end of the tape, it's bookended by the end of Christmas Gift, as if the whole thing was contained within it.
Wow.
That wasn't done on purpose.
Yeah.
I can still remember the intro part. It had Alan Thicke in it at a Christmas Day parade.
Huh.
Alan Thicke's at the Disney Christmas parade in Orlando in his crazy 80s sweater talking to somebody. Oh, so good.
Was he Canadian?
Yeah, he's Canadian.
Rest in peace.
There should be a resurgence in his popularity, if you ask me. Because people were always like, oh, Bill Cosby was America's dad. It's like, you take Bill Cosby off the board, who's left Alan Thicke? Alan Thicke's America's dad now, Canadian or not.
That's true.
I don't know.
Yeah, we adopted him the same way we adopted Michael J. Fox.
Stole him. No, I'm joking.
We stole him, yeah.
No. Nobody gets stolen.
You could have Bieber.
Nobody gets stolen. They sell themselves. Like Wayne Gretzky. I love Wayne Gretzky because of who he is, but let's face it, he sold himself. He got traded to LA because he wanted to.
Yeah.
He cried those crocodile tears. He was so sad to leave. It's he couldn't wait for LA. And he married the American bimbo actress wife and brought his kids up the American way. And that's fine. Whatever he wants to do. And I'm not going to scream at him that he's a sellout. But I'm just saying.
Probably in LA, right? Probably raised his family there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's like a terrible place to raise a family, but you know.
Yep. But again, not to but I mean that's the difference. Like, it's hard because like Bobby Orr, the great Bobby Orr, who I have right there, before Gretzky, he was Bobby Orr, and they were such different personalities. In that Bobby Orr was even though he was the best player in the world, he was actually never even captain of the Bruins. Esposito was captain, and Orr was happy to not be captain because he was a quiet, soft-spoken guy who didn't really like the spotlight, and he would have been uncomfortable with all that. And if he had gotten traded to LA, he probably would have fucking hated it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But like Gretzky, he was ready. He wanted that kind of attention, which is fine. Again, I'm not going to judge the man or anything like that. I'm just saying it's a difference. I mean, maybe it makes us a little harsh as Canadians or hypocritical to judge people that way, but it is true. Like we have this feeling, like although Michael J. Fox, one of the things we like about Michael J. Fox is how low key he is. Michael J. Fox was a big star for a long time, but he never acted like it, and he never acted like it mattered. And he always said he was lucky. He never talked about how hard he worked, even though he obviously did. He never talked about the sacrifices, even though there probably are some. He talked about how he was fucking lucky. And I think that meant a lot to us. And also, he also talked about acting as a job. There's nothing wrong with saying the whole point of this show we do is we talk about the art that's in this, the art of making film. And it's true. People that are actors and directors and writers, they're all artists in their own way. But Michael J. Fox didn't stand up on a pedestal and talk about how he was a great artist and how everyone had to take him so seriously. He talked about how acting was a job, and he was very lucky to have it, and he worked hard at it. And that was it. Because I think a lot of celebrities, especially Americans, not that Canadians can, they get really swept up in their own fame and this idea of being elevated because they're actors and they're stars. Like, I don't think Michael J. Fox would ever want somebody to call him a star. But anyway, so that's one of the things as Canadians we appreciate about some of our Canadian stars is that they're very low key, which is kind of in line with our more national identity. We're a smaller country. We're not huge on the world stage, anything like that. That's why somebody like a Justin Bieber makes us uncomfortable, honestly. Forget whether or not his music is good or not. Let's say his music was even good. It's not. But let's say it was. We still wouldn't be, a lot of us just wouldn't be comfortable with the way he acts, the way he, the way he's out there. It's too showy. It's not Canadian. And maybe that makes us bad because there's nothing wrong if you're a star acting like a star, I suppose. You're a showman. You're a performer. But a lot of Canadians, and not even all, and maybe it's dying out now. Maybe now I have to admit I'm part of an older generation now.
And they're more humble, maybe.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's always been a big part of our national identities. We're more low key, we're more humble, that type of thing, and we get uncomfortable when somebody goes against that. And maybe that's not right because it doesn't make them a bad person per se.
I respect that though. That's the way I would be. I mean, I would think,
Well, some of it also comes from it gets annoying when certain people view success through that lens. Like, you're not really successful until you make it big in the U.S., which is kind of the lens that a lot of Canadians do see some things through. It's like, yeah, it's one thing to be successful here in Canada, but we're small potatoes. When you make it in the U.S., you really made it. And that's what sometimes various filmmakers or celebrities can get accused of, chasing fame in the US instead of just being happy with what they have. I remember, one of the things I liked about Matthew Good was like he was against that kind of shit. Like, he wouldn't go to the Junos for years because he's like, the Junos are fucked, which was by the way, the Junos are our Grammys. He'd say the Junos are fucked now. Like, the only way you give anybody any recognition or anything is based on their success in the US. It's like, I thought this was a Canadian show about Canadian achievement, and you're viewing it through the lens of American success. So he just boycotted the Junos, and it was a good point.
Yeah.
Because, you want to win a Grammy, go win a Grammy. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do that to win a Juno.
Well, recently I told you I read the Matthew Perry, or listened to the audiobook of Matthew Perry's, autobiography thing, after he died.
I always knew about his connection to Trudeau. Again, we're very small. Yeah. We're very small, tight knit. So when people know each other, we know about it. And also, I remember he gave and he was on, I think Jimmy Kimmel, or one of the Jimmys, either Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon. He even talked about the incident you're talking about. But yeah.
Yeah, but I wasn't going to say that, but yeah, he was, wasn't born in Canada, but spent a lot of time in his youth in Canada. But what I was going to say is he brings up how he was on the #1 television show, Friends, and had like the whole 9 yards, or one of those movies came out that was the #1 movie in America.
Pretty big hit. Yeah, big hit.
And he said that the only person that's ever done that was Michael J. Fox with Family Ties, and I guess Back to the Future,
Back to the
or
Future,
two.
probably. Yeah.
I mean, it could have been a number of movies for Michael J. Fox, but can you imagine how huge of a star Michael J. Fox was? Like, Family Ties was huge.
I remember watching Muppet Babies, and they would constantly make Family Ties references, and even show like footage from it, because a running joke was Miss Piggy had a crush on him. So they would actually literally have out of context footage from the show for her to
Michael
talk
P.
to
Keaton.
or interact with. Yeah, Alex P. Keaton.
Or Alex P. Keaton, that's right. Which he would have been up to run for president a few years ago. Is that he was a big conservative.
See, I think I said this before, but I watched that show as a little kid, and I didn't know the whole dynamic of the show. The whole dynamic of the show is his parents were of the hippie generation,
right?
And now they settled into a quiet life, and now they've got a kid who's kind of the opposite of them. He's about the conservatism, the Reagan era, and he wants economic success and things like that. And it's how the clash was like. I watched the show knowing none of that. I was way too young for that.
Oh, I didn't get any of that either.
Yeah,
when it was on.
But I
just think, man, with Back to the Future, I mean, that was a fucking smash hit when it came out. So that guy couldn't go anywhere in the world, without being probably bombarded. So, yeah, he was a pretty, kept to himself type guy, I would imagine, or it still is, but not in the best of health now.
But he's always been my favorite, so I always really respected him. Like I said, the same way I really respect Sarah Pauli, I have the same kind of respect for him. I've always thought they have a lot of integrity.
Exactly. That's what a lot of people in that industry lack.
Yeah. But I don't want this spun the wrong way. I think there are American celebrities with plenty of integrity. I'm not saying it's unique to Canadians. I'm not saying that. There are American celebrities I also admire.
Sure, but they're the ones that you don't hear about, like they're not making the cover of any tabloid or TMZ, because they don't go places where they're going to be noticed or seen, or, if you want to be out there like that, you could put yourself out there like that and be on the cover of everything and whatever, be a blurb in the news if you want to be. But
this doesn't exactly tie into that, but recently I watched the Dark Side of Comedy episode on Phil Hartman. And that's interesting.
That's a rough one.
Because Phil Hartman is Canadian and was quite Canadian sensibilities, but still he was another one, and this isn't a criticism, he loved California, and he loved the California lifestyle. That's what he was all about, and he liked surfing, and he liked the spotlight. And it's funny because he wasn't I'm obviously much too young when he died. He was fucking murdered, but I just mean, he was what, was he 50? He was, he was up there when he died.
When he was killed, yeah, probably close.
But it's interesting because if he was around 50, give or take, his star was actually on the rise at the time, which is almost crazy to think of. Because you usually think, by the time that's happened, it's too late. But Phil Hartman was in a position where he was getting more opportunities and becoming a bigger star.
Oh, yeah, he would have been huge.
Because he'd already had this really great resume, but it was he was on the brink of really breaking through, because he was in movies, but he wasn't the main guy. But it's he was close to that level. He was going to be the star. That was coming. Because he was such a talented writer, too. I think a lot of people don't know, that he was one of the architects of Pee-wee's Playhouse. And, Paul Rubens kind of fucked him over and, threw him to the side when they made the transition from the original show to the television show. And he co-wrote the first movie.
Was that part of some, comedy troupe or something? Or some... Groundlings or something, was it?
I think it was Groundlings.
Okay. I was thinking
that's how it got started. That's how it got started. And he even co-wrote the first movie. And yet once they decided to turn it into the television show, he just cut him out of it. Just we're going forward without you. And he said, it shows in that show that he's talking, it's an interview with Howard Stern of all people. And Howard Stern said, well, did you call him up and say, hey, what's the deal? He's like, no, I didn't. Because that just wasn't his personality. He doesn't want to.
I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, he's the title character. He's Pee-wee. So, I mean, he runs the show,
I understand that. But I just mean, I talk about being quiet and not confrontational, but I think if it was me, I would have said something. I'd be like, I don't get this. Like, I was one of the builders here, and now you don't want anything to do with me, and you're just gonna act like I didn't. I co-wrote the movie and everything. Yeah, but he's just like, no, I never made. He's like, I never made that call. I never asked because like he just, he didn't.
You can at least tell him how you feel at the very least,
Yeah,
like I'm not happy with.
Because that's what I mean. I wouldn't expect that he'd be like, oh, okay, you're right. I made a mistake.
Yeah.
Come on in.
And
at that point, you'd be too annoyed anyway. You'd probably be like, I don't want your money. But yeah, you probably want to get your feelings across. But he's like, no, I didn't even do that. But I just thought he was an interesting thing because he is Canadian, obviously had a Canadian upbringing and stuff like that. But he really did embrace sort of that Hollywood star lifestyle, but at least seemed to have a good balance. Because I don't know. Again, I'm a bit young to remember that era, so maybe there's stuff I'm not remembering. But you never heard anything about like him acting like a diva or anything like that. People only had good things to say about working with him, how great he was to work with. And what was interesting was, that's another thing I didn't know until I watched the show. Obviously, he did news radio, but before news radio happened, he was in line to do a sitcom where he was the main guy. And like so many things that happened in that industry, it fell apart for kind of no reason that anybody can come up with. It's just like, oh, we're not doing that anymore, And then like he was offered news radio where he's a main character, but he's not the main character. And they said he was totally happy. He almost thought it was better. It's like, it's better this way. Like, I don't have to be a writer or a producer. I'll just, come in and perform. Like, and he was content like that. The big thing was his wife. I'm doing the Gretzky thing again. He married an annoying American woman with ambition because that was the thing. She wanted him to push her career. She wanted to be an actress, and she expected him to open doors for her, and he didn't feel comfortable doing that. And I think that's probably one of the reasons she shot him. You can all say, oh, she was coked up. But I mean, coked up people don't necessarily kill people.
No, they don't.
Especially not their own spouse. So I think there's some lingering resentment there. She was mad that he did not really do anything to further her career when she very obviously wanted him to. Showed another thing in that show that I didn't remember. You wouldn't have remembered because, although I did watch Saturday Night Live from that era, it's not like I remember the opening. They do the openings where they show all the performers. Like in his part, he's sitting at a table with her, but the whole point is like it's sort of the back of her head, so you only see him, and that's the point. He's just sitting at the table somewhere in a restaurant. It's like, hey, it's Phil Hartman, and there's some unknown woman there. But she kept turning to the camera and making them do it over and over again until they had to trick her because they didn't want her face in the shot. And then when she found out her face wasn't in the shot, she like unloaded on him and got really mad at him. It was like,
so he was with her from the beginning. With I mean, SNL is kind of what put him on the map, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he married her just around the time he became a cast member, I think.
Wow.
He'd been married before that, but he just sort of gave up on the marriage.
Should have given up on that one.
Yeah. It seemed like given enough time, he might have. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I was always really happy. I mean, it makes me sad too, but they did the right thing. Like, the Simpsons, his characters from the Simpsons, they never recast them. Mm-hmm. They're just like, those are Phil's characters. Let them be Phil's characters, which I like a lot.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, obviously, I did know him from Saturday Night Live, but I knew him more from that. This is definitely The Simpsons.
Let's see what he was. Troy McClure, right? Was his probably the main one.
The two main ones were Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz, the lawyer.
Wow, okay. He wasn't Duffman, right? He wasn't the voice of Duffman.
No. He did do lots of other like lesser characters, but his two main and a couple one-offs, like he did Lyle Langley, who was the guy, the Music Man guy that tricked them into doing the monorail, for instance.
That's a good episode.
We were talking about the monorail episode not too long ago somewhere because we were talking about Conan wrote it and stuff.
One of the best episodes, I would say. And
how originally they were going to get George Takei instead of Leonard Nimoy, and then George Takei declined because he didn't want to make fun of railroads or monorails, which is really weird.
Oh, give me a break.
That's what they said. They said George Takei at the time, the community he was living in, he was on some sort of like board of directors of some community that had something to do with like transportation, and he said
because I'm Chinese, you want me to talk about the railroad?
He's Japanese, but that's funny. But what he said was like he didn't want to like make fun of monorails or like public transportation. Like I don't know why anybody would interpret that like George. It's like the character doesn't make fun of it anyway. It's just in a it's an episode that happens to make fun of the concept, but the whole idea is like the monorail serves no purpose for Springfield. It's kind of pointless. But anyway, so it just seems like a weird thing to take so seriously, George Takei. Like, you think your peers on the board are going to be like, what are you doing in this anti-monorail episode? You're making us all look like fools with this stance. Like, that's a weird thing. Don't you love it when actors get involved in their communities like that?
I mean, knowing he probably needed the work at the time.
I know. What was George Takei really doing in the mid-90s?
What did he do besides Star Trek? I mean,
yeah.
I'm sure he's done some stuff. But...
Oh my!
Yeah, that. that's who people know as George Takei now. Him and just someone going crazy on Twitter.
He's lived quite a life, though. Anyway, it wasn't too bad as far as our directions go, and a lot of it tied into anime and manga and stuff. But we can finish up here. No need to drag on. But so you liked the movie?
I liked it. I think I might like it more if I watched it in English, honestly.
The English is very good, I think. So if you can cut that out, it is very good English dub. It's not one of the crappy ones. It was a
little hard for me to follow. I had to go back and read a little bit to kind of put some pieces together. But yeah,
I especially like the voice actor of the detective. That's one of the reasons why he's one of my favorite characters. Is I really find his English voice actor is very good.
They usually do a great job with casting the English.
Tony Pope. Yeah. These are all good. Like, no big names, not even amongst voice actors, really, although Doug Stone is in there in a rather small role. But people might recognize Doug Stone from some things. Again,
Did you say Tony Pope earlier? Was Tony Pope in there? Or was that another one that you mentioned?
No, that's who I was talking about. Tony Pope is Shinsaku-ban, the detective. And I think he's the best. Out of all of them, I'd say he's the best. And he's one of the reasons. So, yeah, I would definitely say seek it out. You can get watch the English dub. It is very well-known dub. Kenichi's voice is a little grating, but you can live with it. But everybody else is quite good. But yeah, I don't know. It's always been an important movie to me because it was part of that transition. Again, 2001 was an important year, not just because of the films I like, but also just because of where I was in life, where I started to transition from a more casual moviegoer into a more serious one. Mm-hmm. It's one of the first movies I ever bought on DVD, and I've still got it here. I have a lot of affection for it. And yeah, it was very well regarded at the time. A 4-star review from Roger Ebert, that would have carried a lot of weight, you would think.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if it just sort of faded from people's memory. I don't know. It also seems weird to me that in all this time, there hasn't been like another really high budget adaptation of a Tezuka work. Because Tezuka, his popularity is not declined one bit. Like, you think, oh, he's been dead a long time. Like, no, he is still, like, again, he's their Walt Disney. And with apologies to Walt Disney, he's a lot more talented than Walt Disney was. Not that I, going to go there. But
probably less racist, too.
Yeah. Although, I will say, if you buy some of the original Mighty Atom comics, there's usually a disclaimer at the start explaining that there might be some things that don't look so racially good because of the way he drew some other races, but that was not intentional on his part whatsoever. He was really the opposite of that. I think we had this conversation before, but way back when he was like a kid and young man during the post-war period, he was a young man, and there was and where he was growing up, there was American occupation forces there. And one time he got into a confrontation with a few of them where they were like making fun of him and they kind of beat him up a little. And you would think, oh, that would make him like really like hate Americans. But all it really made him feel like was it was he felt like he didn't speak English and they didn't speak Japanese. And he felt like if we could have understood each other, it wouldn't have happened. That was a lesson he took away. Like, what kind of kind person is he? Most people would be like, the foreign devils that bombed my country and are still here, and now they beat me up for no reason. And his takeaway was, if only we could have understood each other. He was just a kind individual, and he worked so hard. But yeah, the racism thing, yeah, like and I understand, like I said, like specifically be like Pacific Islanders and maybe a few black people things. But again, that would not have been.
The Islanders look probably similar to him, I would imagine.
I guess I don't know.
Whatever.
There's a whole thing of real Japanese racism there for sure. Going back to like World War II, right? Like their whole idea was they would conquer these places, treat because they were their lessers, and all the while acting like they weren't. Because their whole thing, often what they said was like they come into like some other Asian country in the South Pacific, and they'd be like, "Look, it's either us or the Americans, and they're white evil. We're Asian Brotherhood." That was their pitch while they subjugated them and did terrible things to them. But anyway, that was certainly not Osamu Tezuka. He was very against that. And that's one of the reasons, again, that was one of the inspirations for Atom. The idea behind Atom was the idea of atomic power and turning into something good. He lived in a country that experienced the horror of having atomic bombs dropped on it. And one of his thoughts was, again, turning it into a positive. What about the positive things that could be done with atomic power? And he created this world of a wonderful future full of great technology that helped people. And then you had this robot boy who's powered by it. And he's a hero and helps people and savior, and a friend to mankind. So he always tried to put a hopeful, positive spin on things. So I think that's another reason why, his popularity has endured. He was super prolific and super talented and super hardworking and influential and all that stuff. But also, I think he just was a really good person with really admirable outlook.
Definitely doesn't hurt. Having a positive outlook on things is not easy to do sometimes, and respect people that can do it.
Yeah, I mean, he only lived to be 60, and he died painfully. He died of, I think, some sort of really aggressive like stomach cancer.
Yeah,
and he didn't want to die. He was still working. Like I said, he really wanted to finish Phoenix, and so quite the legacy. But anyway, yeah, I'm kind of surprised there haven't been some more like high profile adaptations. But the Pluto one is an indirect one because it is. At the source material, it is his thing. It's a little roundabout because it's based on Pluto, which is a reimagining of something he did, but it's a really great reimagining, and it's a very respectful one. But I mean, just seeing it now always makes me think I would love to see a new Atom show with that aesthetic, with Atom as the more realistic looking. Like I never minded the cartoony kind of robotic boy that Atom was, but in this, Atom looks like a normal boy,
right?
And I always thought that would be a good show. This world, if they could do that. But anyway, the closest thing you can get to it now is 8 episodes of this. Adam's not the main character, but of course he does figure prominently. But I would recommend anybody watch it, even if you don't care about anything I said about anime. I would say just watch it because it's great, and it has a lot of the same themes that's in this movie about what a society would be like that has robots, especially robots that are so advanced that maybe you can't even distinguish them from human beings. And then these ideas that like, oh, robots have certain rules and laws in place where they can't harm humans. But it's like, but maybe they can, because there's some interesting spin on that too in the story that I won't be able to. I'm not going to do any spoilers for Pluto. It is another thing like the original story is not much of a mystery, but if you know Naoko Urasawa, mystery is his thing. He loves mystery and he loves especially loves cliffhangers. Nobody stretches out a scene with more like cliffhangers than him, but they're all really good. But anyway, so it's really great from that perspective too, because there really is sort of a mystery going on. I'll just say this doesn't give anything away, but one thing that's completely added that's not in the original comic is, remember I talked about how certain humans were also being murdered at the same time as those robots. The thing they had in common, these humans, was they were part of a group called the Bora Survey Group. And the idea was several years earlier, there was a war in the Middle East called the 39th Central Asian War against a supposed dictator in some, fictional country. And thousands upon thousands of robots were destroyed during it. And it has a very, and obviously Naoko Urasawa was very influenced by the Iraq War in 2003, because it was kind of the same thing. Because the survey group, their job was to go in. They were supposed to look for evidence that this dictator supposedly had been building robots of mass destruction. So there's that thing. And they're being killed off. So anyway, that's not in the original manga at all, but that's something here. There's all this, there's this backdrop of this war, and you're going to find out like the reasons behind it aren't what you think. And it's really interesting stuff. But anyway, I can't recommend it enough. I'm going to watch it again soon. But anyway, thanks so much for being with us for our comeback episode. And
absolutely. And if you made it this far, feel free to comment about what we've talked about, or if you have anything you'd like us to watch or cover on the show, feel free to let us know. Let us know on Twitter at the MDPD or X, excuse me.
Oh yeah, X.
Which is maybe even a dumber name than Twitter. But,
well, it's certainly bland and uninspiring. But yeah. And it's really hard. At least Twitter, you know what you're talking about. You say X, you don't know what you're talking about. X could mean anything. Put some.
But thanks for sticking with us, guys. We'll be back. Hopefully, try to get on more of a regular.
Yeah, I'm going to go through hell to make sure that we're going to put some shows together in a row before this year ends. And then
we'll be doing something on the channel. Maybe even some extra stuff. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. And as we said, the Werner Herzog series is not dead. It will be revived and brought back, much as the show was. We'll get that going again because we keep our promises. We just have to sort some things out there. We're having some difficulty tracking down some of that
years
stuff.
to do, but we'll keep our promises.
Yeah.
But thanks for watching, guys. We appreciate it.
Have a good night, everybody. See you soon.